I mean, I'd rather live with Mom than with you. It was a quiet Friday night, just as the clock struck midnight. My husband, James, was engrossed in an online game in the living room while I was sitting at the dining table, working on some tasks I'd brought home. When James casually mentioned living separately, as if he were discussing the weather, I was stunned. Why? I asked, needing to understand his reasoning, especially since our marriage had been struggling lately. My name is Madison, I reminded myself. It was midnight on my 35th birthday, and I was in the middle of fertility treatments. James's sudden announcement felt like a bombshell, a cruel, unexpected birthday gift that left me completely speechless. Without taking his eyes off the game, James said, "You're 35 now, right? Even if you do get pregnant, it would be a high-risk pregnancy. I've given up on having kids with you. That's why I'm moving in with my mom." What? That doesn't make any sense. I shot back, baffled by the disconnect between giving up on children and his decision to live with his mother. James and I had gotten married the year before last. We initially planned to enjoy some time as newlyweds, but James was eager to start a family. As the youngest of 3 brothers, with each of his older brothers already married and having 3 kids each, James was often told by them that it's best to have children while you're young and energetic. Encouraged by this advice, we laughed it off and enthusiastically tried to start our own family, but a year passed without any success. At one point, James snapped, "You need to get this checked out." "Check what?" I asked, confused. "Find out why we're not having kids. There must be something wrong with you," he shouted. I was infuriated by his assumption, but I still went to see a gynecologist, just to be sure. To my dismay, the test revealed that I indeed had issues making conception difficult. The diagnosis was a shock. I had no symptoms and it was completely unexpected. Dr. Thompson explained, "It's challenging, but not impossible for you to conceive naturally." However, sharing this news with James felt overwhelming. That evening, I tried to explain the situation calmly over dinner. James's reaction was triumphant, as if he had been proven right. "I knew it was you," he said with a smug tone. "But I can still get pregnant," I stammered, trying to defend myself. James glared at me with a cold expression. "No, it hasn't happened yet, so it's not going to," he declared, jumping to conclusions. I felt my anger rise. "For all we know, you could be the one with the problem," I retorted, raising my voice. James shouted back, "Madison, the results are clear, yet you still try to blame me. Unbelievable." In a fit of rage, he slammed his hands on the table, causing me to flinch. "You're just a failure who can't have kids," he spat before storming off to the bedroom. James's harsh words left me in tears as I cleaned up the dishes alone. I told myself that he was just shocked and lashed out in the heat of the moment. If we could just have the child, I believed we could be a happy couple again. Determined to win back his heart, I started going to the gynecologist regularly and learning more about our situation. My anxiety grew, and even on the days most likely for conception, we had no success. I became obsessed with the idea of getting pregnant. One morning, I cautiously suggested, "Let's try tonight, please." He responded with disdain, "Isn't it embarrassing to bring up such a topic first thing in the morning?" I blushed, feeling awkward. Though it felt uncomfortable, such discussions should be natural between spouses. Trying to keep my tone gentle, I continued, "You want children too, right?" But James coldly replied, "Honestly, I don't even want kids. They're too expensive. I only considered it because my brother said a man isn't truly an adult until he has a wife and kids. But now, with this excuse from you, I couldn't care less." From then on, whenever I tried to initiate anything, James would refuse, claiming he was too busy or too tired. I was also exhausted from work, and the repeated rejections were a blow to my pride. Lately, James had become absorbed in online gaming, staying up late into the night. As a result, we hardly talked, let alone had any intimacy. It felt like James had lost interest not only in having children but in me as well. Despite everything, I continued to visit the gynecologist. I was taken aback by the sheer number of couples at the fertility clinic. The place was always bustling, and even with an appointment, a 2 to 3 hour wait was common. It was somewhat comforting to see so many couples facing the same struggles, all doing their best. Occasionally, I'd see couples leaving the doctor's office with tears of joy streaming down their faces. The wives, with still flat bellies, would gently touch their stomachs while their husbands walked closely beside them. I envied them deeply. I wanted a child too, hoping it would restore James's love and bring me happiness. I clung to the fragile hope that having a child would mend things, but I hit a roadblock when I learned that advancing to further treatments would require James to undergo tests. It might now be impossible. The walk back from the clinic always left me feeling desolate and on the verge of tears. As I stepped onto the main street, I noticed an elderly woman in flamboyant attire catching my eye. Her thick makeup and brightly colored dress were almost overwhelming. Though I couldn't recall knowing anyone like her, she had an oddly familiar presence that momentarily distracted me from my tears. Could that be my mother-in-law? I wondered, staring in disbelief. Even though we live in the same city, we rarely cross paths, so she looked completely different from what I remembered. But the distinctive mole on her cheek was unmistakable. My mother-in-law was supposed to be a modestly dressed, typical grandmother, so her radical change in appearance was shocking. I quickly blended into the crowd, trying to avoid her notice. The truth is, my mother-in-law is quite a character, indulgent with herself yet harshly critical of others. She's notorious for hurling insults that most would find shocking. She showers her youngest son, James, with favoritism, treating her other children merely as financial resources. Even her other sons detest her. When my father-in-law was dying of cancer last year, there was talk of her moving in with one of her sons, but both the eldest and the second son firmly refused. We expected the request might come our way, but she announced she would live alone while she was still healthy, possibly out of spite or simply due to her nature. After my father-in-law's passing, she made a scene, accusing everyone of being ungrateful for stealing an old woman's retirement money and took all his inheritance without sharing it. Despite attempts by my brothers-in-law and James to divide it legally, she refused to budge, and no one could prevail against her. She told me, "I have no interest in getting along with you, so don't come to my house," she said. Despite her usual clashes with my sisters-in-law, this interaction was relatively peaceful. She didn't notice me that day and soon disappeared into a store. Her presence in that shop was so unlike the mother-in-law, I knew that I found myself staring at the store's sign in disbelief. That night, I considered telling James about his mother's unusual behavior, but decided against it. She was an adult, and with my father-in-law gone, she was on her own. It wasn't my place to comment on her personal choices. After that, I saw her a few more times but chose to ignore it. Months went by, and as my birthday approached, James brought up the idea of moving out. I asked him, "Is there someone else you're interested in?" I wondered if his talk about his mother was just an excuse and if he was planning to remarry. But given that he spent most of his days gaming at home, it didn't seem like he was seeing anyone. I almost laughed at my own cold reasoning. James replied, "Well, there's a girl in my gaming group I kind of like, but it's just online. For all I know, she could be a guy pretending to be a girl." His response only made the situation seem more absurd. If he could make rational judgments about his online interests, why was he suddenly talking about moving out? It made no sense to me. James simply repeated, "I just want to live with my mom more than I want to live with you." I couldn't understand why James would prefer living with his mother instead of staying with me. "So, have you come to dislike me and lost your love for me?" I asked, my heart itching just to voice the question. It felt as though he no longer needed me, a wife who couldn't bear children. I braced myself for his response, trying to hold back my sadness. "Not really." "What?" James's nonchalant reply caught me off guard. "Like I said before, I don't care about having kids anymore. What we need is a different financial strategy." "Financial strategy?" I repeated, puzzled by his unexpected words. James nodded with a calm demeanor. "Yeah, it's about my mom's inheritance," he said, his tone serious. I was confused, struggling to see the connection. My brothers are greedy. They'll use any excuse, like having more kids, to claim a larger share of mom's inheritance. I won't let that happen. I was stunned by his blatant admission but kept my thoughts to myself. "But your mother is in great health. Isn't it premature to be discussing inheritance?" "That's exactly the point. She dislikes you but favors me. Living with her now could give me an advantage in the inheritance. Plus, there's a substantial fortune my dad left her. We could live comfortably without working hard. We don't have children to look after us in our old age, so we'll need the money," James explained with a dismissive tone, but I was horrified by the implications. "So, you wanted children because you needed them to care for you in your old age. And now that's not an option. You're aiming for a bigger share of your mother's inheritance." I hoped my assumption was wrong as I sought confirmation from James, but his response confirmed my worst fears. "Exactly. Children are supposed to look after their parents. By living with my mom now, I might even secure the entire inheritance, James said, showing his strong allegiance to his mother and lack of intention to be fair. I remained silent, feeling the depth of his familial ties. James continued, "When mom passes away, I'll move back in with you. You may not be able to have kids, but you're good at housework and bringing a decent salary. You're useful as a housekeeper." "Understood. Let's get a divorce," I blurted out, my frustration overriding James's words. Who would agree to such terms? To live separately and then reunite later was an insult. I knew James, the pampered youngest son, had his flaws, but this selfish scheme was beyond forgiveness. I realized that staying with him would never bring me happiness, and at that moment, my love for James completely vanished. "Let's get a lawyer to divide our assets and finalize the divorce." Divorce? I never mentioned anything about divorcing. Just living separately is fine. Hiring a lawyer seems excessive, James said, suddenly flustered but seeming to reconsider. "No, you'll be better off as a single man too. I won't be satisfied unless everything is divided fairly and legally. Plus, having a third party involved will prevent any lingering issues, right?" James smirked. "Maybe you're right. If I get a large portion of mom's inheritance, I'll be set for the future and can remarry. Just don't regret this." "Don't count your chickens before they hatch. Make sure you have no regrets," I replied. The next day, I contacted a lawyer recommended by a divorced friend and arranged a consultation. I also informed the landlord that only James would be moving out and organized a moving company. While making these arrangements, I overheard James on the phone with his mother saying, "I want to live with you and take care of you." I was astonished that he had proposed moving out before even discussing it with her. According to James, his mother was excited about the arrangement and had a few requests. As a result, the divorce preparations proceeded surprisingly smoothly. Originally, the assets were to be split evenly, but my skilled lawyer negotiated a better deal for me, securing 70% of the assets, including compensation. Given James's selfish reasons for our divorce, I decided not to hold back and claimed what I was entitled to. 3 days after our divorce was finalized, James returned to his family home. I was relaxing in my apartment when my phone rang. It was James and his voice was frantic. "Help me please, let's get married again. There's no inheritance. Mom spent it all on strippers. She's broke and deep in debt, and even the house is mortgaged." "Well, that's unfortunate. Your mom was really into those strip clubs," I said, struggling to suppress a chuckle. Just days earlier, I had seen my former mother-in-law heading into a strip club. Curious, I had checked the price list and was shocked by the figures. She had been frequenting the place for some time, clearly spending a fortune. With James becoming obsessed with online gaming and neglecting visits, she had fallen for a stripper and squandered not only my father-in-law's inheritance but also her own retirement savings, accumulating significant debt in the process. "Why didn't you tell me if you knew?" James demanded. "I don't criticize personal hobbies. I never stopped you from gaming, did I?" I shot back. James hesitated, then tried to shift the topic. "She's asking me to take out loans in my name, but that's not feasible. Could you give me the money from our property division? If we get back together, it's both of our money, right?" "Absolutely not." "Why not? You still care about me, don't you? Your husband is in trouble here." "I did love you when we were married, but when you suggested moving out, any affection I have for you vanished completely, especially now when it's clear you're only after money. There's no chance we're getting back together." "But my mom's demanding that I give her all my salary. She says it's only natural for children to support their parents. She was always so kind to me alone." James whined pathetically, but his and his mother's entitlement, that they should come first and everyone else should cater to them, was something I had no desire to support. "We're divorced now. We're strangers. Your family's problems are yours to deal with," I replied firmly before hanging up and blocking his number. I called my former sisters-in-law next. Although it had only been 3 days since the divorce, the urgency of the situation made it clear that waiting wasn't an option. I filled them in on the recent developments about my former mother-in-law and the details of the divorce. They expressed their sympathy and promised to deal with James. Soon after, my former brothers-in-law stormed into the family home, creating quite a scene. I heard about the commotion from one of my former sisters-in-law. After James' call, I decided to change the locks on my apartment for safety and made up my mind to move out. It felt like a complete break from the past. While searching for a new place, I discovered that the family home was up for sale. Though I could have inquired about James and his mother, I chose to focus on moving forward. I was ready to leave the past behind and start fresh. I'm now considering a pet-friendly apartment where I can enjoy a leisurely life with a cute cat.
One day, my husband approached me and inquired, "Hey, how much money do we have in that safe?" I couldn't help but chuckle and replied, probably around $500,000 in total. Now, the following day, upon returning home, I discovered a signed divorce paper on the living room table. Both my husband and the vault were gone. My name is Helen, a 58-year-old working housewife who still puts in diligent effort at my job. You see, my hobby is saving money. Ever since my childhood, my mother opened a savings account for me, teaching me that depositing money in the bank would make the numbers in my passbook grow. I found it incredibly enjoyable to witness this growth. Starting with just $1, I would deposit a little bit at a time, relishing the experience of watching it accumulate. As my savings grew over the years, earning a few cents in interest annually became a delightful surprise to my younger self. With a fondness for money and understanding how it works, I pursued a career as a financial planner, offering advice on asset management. One day, a college friend approached me concerned about an old childhood friend who was in serious trouble due to debt. They asked if I could offer some advice, and intrigued, I agreed to meet with him. This friend, named Mark, was a handsome man with a refreshing smile. He shared his story, confessing his love for gambling and the struggles he faced in making ends meet. Feeling sympathetic, I offered Mark some guidance. Given his precarious financial situation, I advised him to consolidate his debts and reduce his monthly payments to better manage his life. As my friend had asked for my help, I willingly lent a hand. Looking back now, I realized that perhaps I had developed a slight crush on Mark during our interactions. Little did I know that this would lead to a series of troublesome events. Against the advice of my friend, Mark and I decided to get married, believing that our union would help us face his debts together. Due to my stable income and financial expertise, most of Mark's income went towards paying off his debt. I made sure he severed ties with his parents to prevent the debt from escalating. Additionally, I provided Mark with a monthly allowance of $500. However, when Mark decided to cut ties with his parents, they responded with anger and resentment. His mother labeled him an ungrateful child, regretting ever giving birth to him. His father too expressed his discontent, desiring to confront me for what he considered thieving behavior. It was clear that they believed Mark belonged to them as a means to repay their debts. Exhausted from dealing with his parents' debt for so long, Mark finally stood up for himself, declaring he was not their ATM. He returned to me, feeling relieved to be free from their constant reminders of the financial burden. Soon after, we welcomed a son, Kevin, who bore a striking resemblance to Mark. Kevin became my pride and joy, but unfortunately, he inherited his father's lack of discipline and indecisiveness. Just as our son noticed Mark's carefree character, he also observed the never-ending cycle of borrowing money from predatory lenders, dealing with loan sharks, and tricking friends into lending him money for gambling. Our journey was not without its challenges, but I managed to keep Mark on track. Over the span of 23 years, we gradually reduced Mark's debt to around $10,000, nearing full repayment. One day, while on the verge of achieving our financial goal, Mark received a call from his parents. They informed him that his father had collapsed and was at the hospital. Concerned, Mark left work early to be by his parents' side. He messaged me, apologizing for breaking our promise and explaining the situation. I encouraged him to go and comfort his parents, assuring him it was all right. As Mark continued visiting his parents at the hospital, I provided him with a little extra money for the hospital fees they couldn't afford. It seemed my in-laws were struggling financially and relying on Mark for support. Although he withdrew a significant amount from our joint funds each visit, around $1,000 to $2,000 per month, I chose to let it slide, understanding their need for assistance. A year had passed since my father-in-law's collapse, And both my in-laws had aged significantly. They sought someone to lean on, and I suppose they found comfort in Mark's presence. Meanwhile, I continued my hobby of saving money. One day, I retrieved my bank book from the vault and smiled. Mark, who usually showed no interest in my financial endeavors, looked at me and asked, "Hey, how much money do we have in that bank account you always look at so happily?" I casually replied, "It's about $500,000 now." However, the next morning, I discovered divorce papers completed and left in the living room. Both Mark and the safe were gone. As I sat there having breakfast, I couldn't help but smile. I knew Mark had his eyes on the money in the vault, and he had planned to take it all. Imagining him attempting to carry the entire vault nearly made me burst out laughing. In our home, we had a black cat named Luna. We had installed a pet camera to watch Luna's adorable antics, which served as healing moments throughout my day. Luna provided a sense of comfort amid the unexpected turn of events. While watching the pet camera during my lunch breaks, I was always greeted by the adorable sight of my child. But one day, as I switched on the camera, something unexpected unfolded in our living room. My in-laws and my husband Mark engaged in an unbelievable conversation. "Oh, you live in such a nice house, Mark. Your good salary makes your mother so proud," they flattered him. Mark's father responded proudly, "Indeed, I make a decent salary myself. However, Helen takes it all, and I'm left with a mere allowance of $500 a month." "Are you kidding me? That's outrageous. You should be getting more," they exclaimed, sympathizing with Mark. "Why do you obey such a tyrant like Helen? You could live a much better life on your own," they continued. "Mark, you're our pride. You could have saved hundreds of thousands by now. But she's exploiting you? Poor thing." They manipulated him. Listening to their conversation, I wondered if they had completely forgotten that I had worked hard to pay off Mark's debts. I pondered what was going on in their heads. In the past, it was Mark burdened with debt from his parents, and I had to provide them with cash every month, making it challenging for us to get by. "Did you know she has a bank book with tons of savings? It's not fair that you only get $500. Mark complained, and in that moment, my in-laws' eyes lit up. They exchanged glances and eagerly leaned in, awaiting Mark's response. Last I heard, I think it was around $400,000 or $500,000, Mark answered. "Mark, isn't that money rightfully yours?" they asked, trying to persuade him. "It may not match the effort you've put in, but shouldn't you be receiving that money?" "Yeah, I guess you're right. I'm starting to think the same thing," Mark conceded. Despite his good looks, Mark was easily influenced and indecisive. In the past, I found this endearing and wholeheartedly devoted myself to him. However, it seemed he was being manipulated by his parents once again, and they were about to touch my precious savings. Witnessing this scene was incredibly painful. Tears streamed down my face as I sat at my desk at work, holding my phone. For the past 23 years, I had diligently set aside my own living expenses from Mark's income, primarily using it to pay off our debt. On top of that, I provided him with a $500 allowance from my own pocket. Despite explaining this to Mark, it appeared he had completely forgotten what the past 23 years had been for. I felt a deep sadness and pitifulness, as if I were drowning in my own tears in that moment. I made the decision to record the conversation and promptly sent the data to my son. Claiming sickness, I left work early and headed to my regular bar, where I drowned my sorrows in alcohol. Pouring out my heart to the bartender, he gently comforted me, saying, "Why do you grieve for someone like that? You've done nothing wrong. There's no need to live for them. Live for yourself." In that moment, my love for my husband and my intoxication faded away. "Thank you, sir. Next time, we'll share a pleasant dream," I said to the bartender before leaving. Returning home, I entered my study and began devising a plan to retrieve the bank book from the safe. I couldn't fathom how to accomplish it, but I was determined to show them hell. They should never underestimate me. Concentrating harder than ever, I knew that gathering evidence was the first step. From that day on, I diligently checked the pet camera every day, and slowly the ugly truths began to surface. Instead of the woman my husband was having an affair with, my in-laws started appearing on the camera in our house. They were discussing their plan to take the bank book from me. "Is everything arranged to take that bank book from Helen?" they asked, grinning unpleasantly. "You're smart. You must have thought of something, right?" "Yeah, I have a plan. I'm thinking of taking the entire vault." "It'll be easy," Mark responded confidently. "But the safe is quite heavy." "Are you sure you can handle it?" his father questioned. "I'll be fine. I'll load it onto a cart." "Dad, helping out," Mark replied, and his father agreed, saying, "All right, I'll assist you anytime." The safe weighed around 120 pounds, confirming my suspicion that Mark, despite his good looks, was not very smart. At that moment, I solemnly pledged to drag these people down to the depths of hell. They had not only betrayed me, but also ruined the precious moments I spent watching Luna, our cat. Witnessing my husband's infidelity through the camera was a painful blow. I had hoped to find solace in Luna's presence, but even she seemed scared and wouldn't show up. These people had shattered my peace, but I vowed to punish them severely. One day, while I was working, I activated the pet camera once again. This time, it wasn't the woman my husband was having an affair with. Instead, it was my in-laws at our house, discussing their plan to take the bank book from me. With determination in my heart, I continued to gather evidence, and soon the day would come when I would execute my plan and show them the consequences of underestimating me. Facing the reality of my impending divorce, I found myself strangely accepting of the situation. Just how desperate were these people to go after money? I sat at my office desk, sipping coffee, and recorded the scene on my phone screen. Surprisingly, I wasn't upset or sad anymore. If they had such intentions, so did I. I was determined to show them the consequences of their actions. Then, the day finally arrived. "Hey, how much money is in that passbook on the vault? You always seem so happy when you're looking at it," Mark asked. "Right now, there's about $500,000 in there," I replied casually. The next day when I arrived home, I discovered a signed divorce paper in the living room. Both my husband and the vault were gone. A smirk formed on my face as I sat down to have breakfast. I acted quickly, immediately filing the divorce papers and contacting my son Kevin. "Your father finally stole the vault. Can't believe he managed to carry it. It's so heavy," I told him. Kevin responded, "Mom, I think it's about time you end things with Dad. By the way, did he take everything in the vault too?" "No, actually, I moved all the money to online banking. The passbook is essentially worthless now. The most valuable thing might have been the safe itself since it was so heavy. Oh, by the way, I've already filed the divorce papers. Now I'm thinking about filing a police report. What do you think?" I explained to Kevin, who agreed and suggested that I should file a police report and hire a lawyer. "Right, a lawyer. I already have a private investigator on it, but I hadn't thought about a lawyer." "Thanks," I replied to Kevin. He seemed exasperated. Following Kevin's suggestion, I reached out to a lawyer through my private investigative contact. I handed over the recording from my pet camera to both the police and the lawyer, and then I waited. After a while, I received a call from my ex-husband, sounding quite frantic. "What the hell? The passbook is empty. What happened to the $500,000? You tricked me. That was my money. Where is it? Tell me now, or I'm going back to the house and abandoning your cat Luna," he threatened. "You just committed theft, and now you're threatening me. From now on, communicate through my lawyer," I calmly responded and blocked his number. I reported the incident to the police and sent the recording to my lawyer. It was a relief to finally take action. This was exactly what I had wanted to do. A short while later, I received a call from the police. "We have caught the thief. However, the vault was damaged. It appears he forced it open, and the things inside were burned," they informed me. My ex-husband and his parents learned that the passbook balance was zero, and they set the contents of the vault on fire. Although it was his first offense, my ex-husband spent a few days in custody. Discoveries continued as my ex-husband broke into the house he used to live in after his release. However, I had already filed for a divorce and obtained a restraining order. When he started causing a scene, I called the police, and within 10 minutes, they took him away again. I contacted my lawyer, explained what happened, and had him start the process of getting a restraining order. Furthermore, I asked the lawyer to sue for emotional distress due to his infidelity. The lawyer mentioned that we might not get much money from his broke family, but that didn't really matter to me. What I wanted was alimony. It seems my ex-husband broke into our house because he was discarded by his mistress and wanted to get back with me. His mistress promptly transferred $10,000 as alimony and seemed to have disappeared. It appears they split after the vault incident, realizing that when the money runs out, so does the love. My underpaid ex-husband, who still has $10,000 in debt, and his gambling-addicted parents seem to be struggling with their daily lives. He is living in an old single-room apartment without a bath, constantly quarreling with his parents. This information came from my lawyer. My ex-husband pleaded with me, saying, "I can't afford to pay the alimony. Please reduce the amount." But I refused, telling him to stay away from me. "If you're really sorry, show it with money," I said. If he had stayed with me, he had planned to end the remaining $10,000 of debt by the time he retired. But he fell for the sweet talk of his gambling-addicted parents-in-law. In the end, how foolish they all were. The $500,000 in savings was the accumulation of my hard work since a young age. I find joy in saving small change and updating the bank book. Now I will start a new bank book. I am living a relaxed life with my black cat Luna. My son visits occasionally and tells me about his girlfriend. This time, I am going to spend time for myself. I need to buy a new safe, one that's so big that a person can't carry it. Right, Luna? I am the happiest I've ever been.
Your presence here ruins the atmosphere of the venue. Could you please leave? He sneered. Though he was technically my brother-in-law's father, his words cut deep. I had traveled a long way to celebrate my sister's wedding, only to find out I was an uninvited guest to the groom's family. What's the matter? Hurry up and leave. Just having someone like you here ruins the wedding, he spat. Understanding I wasn't welcome, I nodded. Understood. I'll take my leave. I stepped outside and called my husband. What's going on? Why are you here? He asked, concern in his voice. I was told to leave, so I did, I answered honestly. There was nothing else to say. What does this mean? He muttered darkly, turning his gaze toward the groom's family. They stared back, unrepentant. My name is Lisa, and I'm 32 years old. I live with my husband, who is 11 years older than me. The only family I have left are him and my younger sister, Summer, who is 10 years younger. Our father left when I was 10, leaving us in a single-parent household. Summer had just been born, and our mother worked tirelessly to raise us. She juggled jobs from morning till night, and I stepped in to take care of my sister. Despite the hardship, I never complained. We managed until I graduated high school, but years of overwork caught up with my mother, and she passed away. With no extended family to rely on, Summer and I were left to fend for ourselves. What's going to happen to us now, sis? Summer asked, her young face full of fear. Don't worry, I'll manage somehow, I reassured her, though I had no plan. I found a job as a clerk at a small company. The pay wasn't great, but they were willing to hire a high school graduate. It was a small workplace, so I quickly found myself handling a variety of tasks. At first, it was simple clerical work, but my responsibilities grew over time. The boss, however, was kind and supportive. Lisa, would you like to earn a qualification? He asked one day. A qualification? Yes, it's a bit specialized, but we need someone qualified, and you're young, it shouldn't be too hard for you to study, he explained. Would this be outside of working hours? Don't worry, we'll cover the exam fees and textbook costs. Please, I'm asking as a favor. The boss's earnest demeanor made it hard to refuse, but Besides, earning a qualification could open more doors for me in the future. I thought of Summer, her needs would only grow as she advanced through middle and high school. Understood, I agreed. Don't push yourself too hard, sis, Summer would sometimes say, her voice filled with concern. Don't worry about me, when you graduate high school, you can do whatever you want, I told her. As she entered high school, Summer began considering working right after graduation, but I didn't want her to struggle the way I had, so I convinced her to aim for college. There was one problem, my salary made saving for tuition difficult. I began thinking about changing jobs. When I confided in my boss, I expected disappointment, but he was surprisingly understanding. I completely understand, he said. Actually, I know someone starting a new company. They're looking for someone to handle clerical work. A new company? Yes, and don't worry, it's run by someone very capable. Their business is already doing well, and they're looking for talented employees. The boss assured me the new company's work would be similar to what I was already doing. It sounded ideal, though leaving felt bittersweet. I've been thinking of closing this company soon anyway, my boss admitted. Most of us here are nearing retirement, and it's getting harder to keep up, so don't worry about leaving, you've done more than enough. After 5 years with the company, hearing his kind words brought tears to my eyes. Don't cry, he said gently. If I make a young girl cry, my wife will scold me. It's better when you smile. With his blessing, I joined the new company. Nice to meet you, I'm Mike, my new boss introduced himself. He was 38, with an air of professionalism that was hard to miss. Nice to meet you, I'm Lisa, I replied. We really needed someone with your qualifications. You've been a great help already, Mike said warmly. If you could handle things at your previous company, I'm confident you'll excel here. Thank you very much, I said, feeling both nervous and excited for what lay ahead. I was nervous, but I think I handled it well. Before I knew it, Mike's company had become my new workplace. It was a startup, aggressively expanding, and Mike was at the center of it all. Though it was a new company, it seemed well-backed, with many big projects already on the table. I'm really grateful to have you here, Lisa, Mike said one day. Your office skills are specialized, and it helps that you have such a strong background. I'm glad I invested in your training. His words made me happy, and as time went on, I could see the company growing. Mike appreciated my work, and I no longer worried about my sister's tuition or our daily expenses. You seem so lively these days, my sister commented one morning. Really? Before, you always seemed overwhelmed by work, but now you seem to enjoy it. Maybe it's because of someone, I teased. Mike? She asked, joking. Don't be silly, I laughed. Go get ready for school. 4 years later, I was 27, and my sister was about to graduate high school. She was doing well in school and aiming for her preferred university. Barring any health issues, she was expected to pass. Meanwhile, Mike's company was flourishing, taking on larger projects, and Mike was a brilliant leader, always bringing in new work and building partnerships. The number of employees quickly increased, and before I knew it, I was training new hires. How about a trip sometime? Mike suggested. A trip? But my schedule. I anticipated that. I'll make sure to wrap things up early. Leave it to me, thank you, but that feels like a luxury. Mike insisted. Let's relax a bit. You've earned it. As part of the founding team, I spent a lot of time with Mike. Naturally, our relationship grew romantic. Despite the 11-year age difference, it didn't matter to me, but there was one thing on my mind. Could we wait to get married? One late night, just the two of us in the office, I decided to share my feelings. Mike, it's not that I don't want to marry you. You're a wonderful man, and I do want to marry you, but I have my sister. She's much younger than me, and until she's independent, I can't leave her. Could we wait until she graduates? I feared it was a selfish request. Mike, already in his mid-30s, was likely thinking seriously about marriage. I wasn't sure if it was too much to ask. Of course, I'll wait until she graduates, Mike said, without hesitation, but in return, let's have dinner with your sister. After all, she'll be family. I was touched by his understanding. His assertiveness was part of what made him such a successful entrepreneur. So, the three of us began spending more time together. As Mike's company stabilized and my sister neared the end of her high school years, we all decided to go on a trip together. It was a wonderful experience, one we wished could last forever. But eventually, the trip ended. My sister went off to college, and Mike and I returned to work. Since the university was nearby, my sister still lived with me, but I knew we'd see less of each other. Around that time, she told me she wanted to get a part-time job. Sure, everyone starts with no experience, I said, though I was still a little worried. I'll be fine, she reassured me. I've been learning about business management from Mike. I'm ready. Her optimism surprised me. She was so much more mature than I had expected. She had always been like that, and her positivity had helped me through tough times. Then, one day, she surprised me even more. Sis, guess what? She said, her eyes sparkling. What is it? I'm getting married after college. I was stunned. Married? Sorry, what? She continued nonchalantly. I'm serious about marrying after graduation. Who's the guy? You don't know him. Or maybe you do. Don't mess with me, I said, half in disbelief. In the summer of her junior year, she announced her plans to get married. I was completely shocked, though she often said surprising things. I hadn't expected her to go this far. The word marriage was sensitive for me, especially considering my thoughts about Mike and me. Remember the business seminar? She asked. I clicked with a guy there. He's planning to start his own company, and he's a good guy, so I thought, why not marry him? Marriage isn't something to take lightly, I said, my voice rising. It's a big commitment, a lifetime decision. I almost expressed my bitterness about our parents, but held it back. My sister gave me a direct look. Don't you want to respond to Mike's feelings? She asked. But I promised to look after you until I graduate. You think I can't manage without you? I've got my life planned, and I've met a good guy. You need to think about your own happiness. Tears welled up in her eyes. She was no longer the little girl I had cared for. Unless you get married first, it's awkward for me, she said. I guess so, I replied softly. Mike and I ended up getting married, and everyone at the company celebrated. Even my first boss came to offer his congratulations, but I still had one more task, meeting my sister's fiancé's family. Brian, her fiancé, seemed like a great guy. He was the eldest son of a small business owner. The business is going to my brother, though, Brian explained. Really? I asked, curious. I always wanted to start my own business, he said, and I liked the idea of working with our family business, so we decided to start our own company together. That's how we met, he added, smiling. Pretty cool, right? We've already incorporated, even as students. Student entrepreneurship isn't that uncommon these days. I was an employee myself, so I couldn't fully follow their discussions, but Brian's family seemed like good people, and I felt he was compatible with my sister. I didn't worry about their future. It was Mike who had introduced Summer to Brian, and he had played a key role in connecting them. I was grateful to him. Our first meeting ended on a warm note, but I still had to meet the rest of Brian's family. It was a natural step, now that we were becoming relatives, but the business owners made me nervous. Strangely, they asked me to come alone. Lisa, yes? I believe you're here to discuss your sister's marriage to Brian. That's correct, I replied, trying to remain composed. That's not why we called you. My father-in-law's voice was sharp. We're here to ask you not to get involved. I was taken aback. What do you mean? You never went to college. You lost your parents, and while Summer seems capable, you certainly don't. Don't expect any help from us. I have no intention of relying on you. I shot back. I've worked hard all my life, supported myself, and planned for my future with Mike. Whether I retire later or not is none of your concern. Words are cheap, my father-in-law sneered. There are many unreliable people out there. We'll invite you to the wedding out of courtesy, but afterward, stay away. The people attending will be far above your station. It would be embarrassing for you to show up. Their laughter echoed with scorn, and I couldn't bear it any longer. When my sister gets married, she'll have a proper family with Brian. Let's hope she doesn't end up like you, they added cruelly. Tears welled in my eyes, but I held my head high as I excused myself. I won't miss my sister's special day, I said firmly, though my voice trembled. As soon as I was outside, I half ran home, tears streaming uncontrollably. No matter how much I washed my face, the pain lingered. Looking at my red, swollen eyes in the mirror, I whispered to myself, I'll never let them see me like this again. The insults didn't just hurt me, they felt like an attack on everyone who had supported me throughout my life. But no matter what, I resolved to attend my sister's wedding. Watching her get married felt like a final act of letting go, a passing of the torch. Time flew by, and soon, her college graduation and wedding day arrived. You'd better come to my wedding, sis, my sister teased. I've planned an amazing day. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I replied with a smile, hiding my unease about seeing Brian's family again. The venue was extravagant, and the guests exuded wealth and prestige, dressed in formal wear. I felt overwhelmed but kept my composure as I showed my invitation to the usher. He guided me to a private room. As soon as the door opened, mocking voices greeted me. "So, you actually came. You really don't understand social cues, do you?" Standing before me were Brian's father, mother, and younger brother Dustin, all dressed in high-end suits and designer attire. "Why are you here?" Dustin sneered. "Do you not realize how far beneath us you are? Having someone like you here lowers the venue's prestige. You weren't really meant to show up," his father added. "Even though we invited you, we expected you to know better." "Get the guards to remove her," Dustin said dismissively. The flood of insults continued, cutting deep. I endured them silently until they crossed the line. "What if Summer ends up like you?" Dustin spat. "She won't," I snapped, my voice shaking. "Summer is hardworking and smart. Besides, she and Brian are starting their own business together." "Ridiculous. Brian will take over our company, not start some side project," his father scoffed. "That's not what they said," I countered. "They've already incorporated their own company." Their faces twisted in disbelief. Before they could hurl more accusations, the door opened. "Sorry I'm late." Mike's voice filled the room. The family's demeanor shifted instantly. "Mike, it's been too long." They greeted him warmly, falling over themselves to show respect. Mike ignored their pleasantries. "Have you seen my wife?" "Your wife?" they echoed, shocked. "Oh, there she is," Mike said, spotting me in the corner. "Why are you standing there?" "They told me to leave," I said softly. Mike's expression darkened. "Why would you tell my wife to leave? She's also the bride's sister." The room fell silent, their faces pale. "We didn't know," the father stammered. "Explain what happened," Mike demanded. I recounted everything truthfully. "So, you insulted my wife and tried to humiliate her?" Mike's voice was icy. "Insulting her is the same as insulting me. Is that how you treat family?" "We didn't mean to insult her," they stuttered, visibly sweating. "Then what did you mean?" Mike's piercing gaze made them shrink. After a long pause, he continued, "I do business with your company, but we're not family. Brian is my friend. But that doesn't mean I'll tolerate disrespect toward my wife. Effective immediately, I'll be ending our business relationship." "Wait, that will ruin us," Brian's father cried. "Please reconsider." "I won't. Don't worry, though. I'll work with Brian and Summer's new company instead. They've earned my trust." The family looked stunned, realizing they had lost both their son's loyalty and a critical business partner. Mike turned to me. "Let's go," he said, leading me out of the room. The wedding proceeded without further drama. Brian and Summer began their new life together, moving into a new home as they focused on growing their business. Meanwhile, the in-laws faced the consequences of their actions, their company struggling without Mike's support. As for us, life brought a new chapter. I gently patted my belly one evening, excitement and nervousness filling me. When Mike returned home, I greeted him with his favorite stew and a big smile. "I have news," I said, placing his hand on my stomach. His eyes lit up. "Really? That's amazing." He hugged me gently. With a baby on the way, our family was growing, and though our responsibilities would increase, I knew we could handle it. Together, we would build a happy home filled with love and hope for the future. When my parents passed away in a tragic car accident, my world shattered. I was only 24, barely out of university, with no siblings or extended family to lean on. Grief consumed me, and it felt like the ground had been yanked from under my feet. My parents had always been my pillars of strength, and their sudden absence left me adrift in a storm I wasn't prepared for. Amid the darkness, I clung to the one bright spot in my life, my husband, Ravi. We had only been married for a year, and his warmth had been a source of comfort during my parents' illness. When they passed, he promised to stand by me, to be my family when I felt I had none. I believed him. But promises, I would soon learn, were just empty words. Shortly after my parents' funeral, cracks began to show in our marriage. At first, they were subtle. Ravi working late, coming home distant and irritable. He assured me it was just stress from work, but my gut told me something was wrong. Then, his family began visiting our home more frequently, bringing with them a wave of judgment and criticism. "You're too slow with housework," his mother said one afternoon as she inspected the kitchen like a drill sergeant. "And look at these dishes, still wet. You were spoiled in your parents' house, weren't you?" Ravi said nothing. He sat silently in the living room as his mother's sharp words cut into me. I tried to dismiss it as cultural differences at first. After all, Ravi's family had traditional values, and I assumed they were just adjusting to having a modern daughter-in-law. But as the weeks turned into months, their visits turned into stays, and their criticisms turned into demands. Then came the bombshell. One evening, Ravi came home late as usual, his face clouded with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We need to talk," he said, avoiding my gaze. My heart sank. "What is it?" He hesitated for a moment before blurting out, "I think we should take a break. I need some space to figure things out." It felt like a knife to the chest. "A break?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We're married, Ravi. What does that even mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he packed a bag and left that night, leaving me alone in the house. The next morning, his family arrived with their suitcases. "We're moving in," his mother announced as if she owned the place. "Ravi told us everything. We'll help you adjust while he sorts himself out." Adjust? What was I adjusting to? My husband abandoning me? But I didn't argue. I was too emotionally drained, too lost in my grief and confusion to fight back. It didn't take long for their true intentions to surface. Ravi's mother and father treated me like their personal maid. I cooked, cleaned, and catered to their every whim while they criticized everything I did. "You call this tea?" his father scoffed one morning, shoving the cup away. Even a child could do better. At first, I tried to appease them, thinking they might soften if I showed kindness, but their demands only grew. Soon, I was waking up at dawn to prepare their breakfast, spending the day cleaning, and staying up late to iron their clothes. I felt like a shadow of my former self, a servant in my own home, with no one to turn to. My friends drifted away as I withdrew into isolation, too ashamed to tell them what was happening. And Ravi? He stopped answering my calls altogether. One day, while I was scrubbing the kitchen floor, Ravi's mother loomed over me with a smirk. "You should be grateful we're here," she said. "Without us, you'd have nothing." Her words echoed in my mind long after she walked away. Nothing, was that what my life had become? Still, I held on to a sliver of hope that Ravi would return and things would go back to the way they were. But deep down, I knew the truth. The man I had married was gone, and the family I had married into saw me as nothing more than a burden. The days blurred into weeks, and the weight of their cruelty began to suffocate me. But as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, I made a silent promise to myself: I wouldn't let them break me. Little did I know, the turning point in my life was just around the corner. As the weeks stretched into months, I fell into a routine that left me both physically and emotionally drained. My days revolved around fulfilling endless demands, each one more demeaning than the last. It wasn't just the housework. My in-laws seemed to find pleasure in reminding me of my place in the family. "You're lucky Ravi married you," his mother would sneer as I set the table for dinner. "What do you even bring to this family? You're useless without him." I wanted to fight back, to shout that I wasn't useless, but I was too worn down. They had taken everything from me, my confidence, my home, my sense of self. One evening, as I was folding laundry in the corner of the living room, my father-in-law walked in, speaking on the phone. His voice was unusually enthusiastic. "Of course, we'd be honored to have you for dinner, sir," he said, bowing his head slightly as if the person on the other end could see him. "It's the least we can do to show our gratitude for everything you've done for the company." When he hung up, he turned to me with a sharp glare. Dinner needs to be perfect tomorrow night. My boss is coming over, and if you embarrass me, you'll regret it." I nodded silently, suppressing the urge to snap back. The next day was a whirlwind of preparations. I was up before dawn, scrubbing every corner of the house, shopping for the finest ingredients, and cooking a feast fit for royalty. My hands ached, my back screamed in protest. But I didn't stop, not because I cared about impressing my father-in-law's boss, but because I needed to prove to myself that I was capable of more than they believed. By the time the doorbell rang that evening, I was exhausted but proud of the spread I had prepared. My in-laws had dressed up as though they were hosting a state dinner, and I was instructed to stay in the kitchen, out of sight. "Just bring the food out when we call for it," my mother-in-law hissed, shooing me away. I stood in the kitchen, my heart pounding as I heard the door open. My father-in-law's booming voice filled the air as he greeted his boss, a man he clearly revered. "Welcome, sir, please, come in. It's an honor to have you here." Curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked through the doorway. The man standing in the foyer was tall, with a commanding presence that made the room seem smaller. His suit was impeccable, and his expression was one of quiet confidence, but as his eyes scanned the room, they landed on me, and froze. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, but then he spoke, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Sana, is that you?" My breath caught in my throat. How did he know my name? Before I could respond, my father-in-law stepped in, laughing nervously. "Oh, don't mind her, sir, she's just the help." The man's eyes narrowed, and he turned to face my father-in-law with an intensity that made the room fall silent. "The help?" he repeated, his tone icy. "Do you have any idea who she is?" I felt the blood drain from my face. Who I was? What was he talking about? My father-in-law stammered, clearly caught off guard. I don't understand, sir, she's my daughter-in-law." "But," the man cut him off, his gaze never leaving mine. "Sana, it's me, don't you recognize me?" I stared at him, my mind racing. There was something familiar about him, but I couldn't place it. Then, like a floodgate opening, the memories came rushing back. "Mr. Sharma," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He smiled, a warmth in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. "Yes, your father and I worked together for years. He was my closest friend." The room seemed to spin as the weight of his words sank in. This man, this powerful, imposing figure, was my late father's best friend, and now, he was my father-in-law's boss. The silence in the room was suffocating. My in-laws exchanged nervous glances, clearly caught off guard by the revelation. I, too, was struggling to process what Mr. Sharma had just said. My father's best friend? Why had my father never mentioned him? And if he was so close to my family, why had he disappeared from our lives? Before I could ask, Mr. Sharma turned to my father-in-law, his expression cold and unforgiving. "You've been treating her like a servant?" he asked, his voice low but seething with anger. My father-in-law stammered, "And no, sir, it's not like that. She helps out." "Helps out?" Mr. Sharma cut him off, his voice rising. "I saw how she was hidden away in the kitchen. Don't try to lie to me." He turned back to me, his gaze softening. "Sana, you don't belong here. Come with me." The words hit me like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. For the first time in years, someone was standing up for me, seeing my worth. But before I could answer, my mother-in-law stepped in. "She's our daughter-in-law," she snapped, her voice trembling with both anger and fear. "She belongs here with her husband." Mr. Sharma raised an eyebrow. "And where is her husband? Why isn't he here, supporting her?" The question cut through the room like a knife. Ravi wasn't here, he was never here. My in-laws had no answer, and their silence was damning. Finally, I found my voice. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Sharma," I said, trying to steady my shaking hands, "but I can't just leave." He frowned, clearly not satisfied with my answer. "You don't have to live like this, Sana. Your father would never have wanted this for you." His words brought tears to my eyes. My father, the man who had always believed in me, who had given me the strength to dream big. What would he think if he saw me now? But the chains of obligation were too strong. I couldn't just walk away, not yet. "Thank you," I whispered, "but I need time." Mr. Sharma didn't argue further, but the fire in his eyes told me he wasn't going to let this go. He stayed for dinner, though the atmosphere was tense. My in-laws fawned over him, desperately trying to win back his favor, but he remained distant, his attention mostly focused on me. As he was leaving, he handed me a business card. "If you ever need anything at all, call me," he said firmly. I nodded, tucking the card into my pocket. The next few days were unbearable. My in-laws were furious with me, blaming me for embarrassing them in front of Mr. Sharma. They doubled down on their mistreatment, giving me even more chores and berating me at every opportunity. But something had changed in me. Mr. Sharma's words lingered in my mind, igniting a spark of hope I hadn't felt in years. I began to dream of a life beyond this house, beyond this toxic environment. One evening, while cleaning my husband's study, I found a pile of unpaid bills hidden in his desk drawer. My heart sank as I realized the depth of our financial troubles. No wonder my in-laws clung to Mr. Sharma's goodwill, they were drowning in debt. That night, as I lay awake, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this be my life. I didn't know how, but I was going to find a way out. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, but the tension in the house was palpable. The night before, I had overheard my father-in-law on the phone with Mr. Sharma. He was desperate, pleading for some sort of favor. "He's our last hope," I heard him mutter to my mother-in-law afterward, "If he pulls out his investments, we'll lose everything." They were right to worry. Ravi had racked up enormous debts, much of it from failed business ventures he'd kept hidden. And now, Mr. Sharma, perhaps the only person who could save them, was squarely on my side. That realization gave me strength. I wasn't just some helpless woman trapped in their web of control. I had a voice, and for the first time in years, I was ready to use it. The next day, Mr. Sharma called me directly. "I've thought about what you said, Sana," he began. "I won't pressure you to leave your in-laws, but I want you to come work for me. You're brilliant and capable, don't let them convince you otherwise." His words filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years, but the idea of working outside the house terrified me. My in-laws had always discouraged me, telling me I wasn't smart enough or educated enough. "I don't know," I murmured. "You don't have to decide now," he said gently, "but remember, this is your life. You deserve to live it on your own terms." That evening, I finally confronted my in-laws. I walked into the living room, clutching the business card Mr. Sharma had given me. My hands were shaking, but my voice was firm. "I've decided to take Mr. Sharma's offer," I announced. My mother-in-law's face turned red with fury. "You will do no such thing," she spat. "What will people say if our daughter-in-law goes to work like some common woman?" I met her gaze, unflinching. What people think doesn't matter to me anymore. My father-in-law tried a different tactic, his tone manipulative. "Sana, think about the family. If you leave, how will we manage? We're on the verge of losing everything. Maybe you should have thought about that before treating me like a servant." I shot back, my voice rising. Their protests continued, but I didn't back down. For the first time in years, I felt a surge of confidence. I wasn't going to let their fear and control dictate my life any longer. The next morning, I packed my things. My in-laws hurled insults as I walked out the door, but I didn't care. For the first time since my parents' death, I felt free. Mr. Sharma met me outside his office building. He had arranged everything, a place for me to stay, a job that suited my skills, and even a plan to help me reclaim the confidence I had lost. "You're going to do great things, Sana," he said, smiling warmly. In the weeks that followed, my life transformed. I threw myself into my work, discovering talents I never knew I had. Mr. Sharma became not just a mentor, but a father figure, reminding me of the love and support my own father had once given me. As for my in-laws, their world began to crumble. Without my unpaid labor, their household fell into chaos, and when Ravi returned, expecting to pick up where he left off, he found a very different woman waiting for him. "You're too late," I told him, my voice steady. "I'm not the same person you left behind." His pleas fell on deaf ears. For once, I wasn't looking back. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, gazing at the city lights. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the future. Mr. Sharma's voice echoed in my mind, "This is your life. You deserve to live it on your own terms." And that's exactly what I intended to do.
I now live with my parents, so why don't you, a stranger, just move into a cheap place? What's the big deal, right? I thought my husband would make me happy, but turns out, he was just using me. His family betrayed me, and I was really shocked. It seemed like they hadn't even realized how naive they were. But if they kick me out, who's going to pay the bills? I realized there was no point in being part of this family, so I knew what I had to do next. I got in touch with everyone and started getting ready. What happened to all the stuff? I had a company come and take it all away. The next day, I called another company and got rid of all the furniture and appliances. My husband freaked out and started yelling. My name is Michelle Thompson. I'm 35 years old. I've been working from home since I finished college. I only have to travel once a month, but I work full-time. My company has been really understanding because both of my legs are disabled, so I use a wheelchair to get around. This happened because I had a motorcycle accident in college. A car crashed into me from behind on the highway, and I was thrown into the air. It felt like everything was moving really slowly. This is it for me, I remember thinking as I flew through the air. Luckily, I didn't die, but my legs got injured and I can't move them anymore. I've been doing rehab ever since, but they probably won't get better. I've been in a wheelchair for years now. I guess I'll probably stay single for the rest of my life. Once I accepted my condition, I started wanting to get married again. One day, my friends arranged a blind date for me, and that's when I met Ken, who's 5 years older than me. Despite his age, he looked younger. What surprised me was how immature he acted for a 40-year-old. He's very straightforward, which means he doesn't hold back. After seeing me in a wheelchair, he didn't hesitate to ask all sorts of questions like, how do you do everyday things like eating or chores? Can you manage work? Are you independent in the bathroom or for bathing? While others tiptoed around the topic, Ken asked me everything bluntly. Most people might find his approach rude, but I actually liked that he was genuinely interested in me. We went on a few more dates and eventually became a couple. I believed I could find happiness with him. At that time, I couldn't imagine being with anyone else who would want to be with me forever. So when Ken proposed just 6 months into our relationship, I was thrilled. But things took a turn after we got married. When Ken and I moved in together, we chose my rented house, which is a bit expensive but very wheelchair-friendly, probably because the previous tenant made it that way. Ken liked the spaciousness. Since I spent most of my time at home, I ended up doing most of the housework. Sometimes when I was tired, I'd ask him for help, but he'd just say he was too tired and wouldn't lift a finger, not even to help me bathe. Seriously, I'm not doing that, Ken said when I asked him for help. I technically can manage on my own, but it takes a lot longer. When I lived alone, I had a caregiver come twice a week to assist me in the bath. I was used to managing the other 5 days on my own, but I always wished Ken would help. It would be so much quicker. Every time I spent a long time getting into the bath, I stopped asking for the caregiver's help because Ken said it was a waste of money. As I was bathing, I started feeling tired in my arms. The bathroom was originally designed to be accessible, which was one of the reasons we chose the place. But when Ken took a bath first, he wouldn't tidy up afterward. He'd leave the bath bucket out and shampoo bottles on the floor, which made things even more difficult for me. Hey, could you please think about making it a little easier for me when I bathe alone? Just let me have a bath without overthinking it, I asked him. But no matter what I said, Ken wouldn't listen. This house is designed for you to live comfortably. I moved in for you and you still complain, Ken argued. You wanted to move to Ken. When did I ever say that? This house was originally my place. That's why it's set up for someone in a wheelchair. The first time I invited Ken over, he seemed impressed by the spaciousness and the appliances. I'd love to live here after we're married, he said, admiring everything. But now he complains, saying things like, this handrail is such a nuisance. It's like living in an old person's home. Why would you say that? Yeah, I should have looked more closely before, I admitted to myself. It finally dawned on me after we started living together. Ken married me because of the house, the appliances, and the fact that I could manage household chores despite my disability. Ken received praise from his colleagues and friends for being a wonderful husband, but that's far from the truth. He's just taking advantage of the fact that I can do everything by myself despite my disability. And on top of that, he's been jobless and partying every night since we started dating. Realizing all this after getting married is heartbreaking and makes me want to cry. But despite everything, I haven't broken up with him. I keep telling myself that there must be some love there since we got married, right? Hey, can you give me some allowance? Ken asked. You received some just the other day, didn't you? I replied. Yeah, but I've already spent it, Ken admitted. Slowly, Ken started to depend on me for money without putting in any effort to work for it. I decided to reach out to Ken's mother for advice. Ken doesn't seem interested in working. What should I do? He's always been hardworking. Maybe he just needs a break. Even though she told me I could talk to her about anything, she always sided with her son. She'd say, it's natural since he's an only child. But I wasn't convinced. Since I've lost both my parents, I have no other family to turn to. I felt completely lost. I thought about discussing it with a friend, but the last time I mentioned my problems, they told me, I wish I had problems like that. Ken always seems to appear fine on the surface. That evening, Ken confronted me. Did you go talking to Mom about my work? He accused. Yeah, why? Would it bother an older person like her? I can't believe you. I responded. Seriously? Well, maybe you should work so I don't have to worry, I retorted. Ken stormed out after that. It's typical of him, He always leaves when things don't go his way and then returns drunk early in the morning. I'm back, babe, he slurred. It's early, don't disturb the neighbors, I cautioned. Keep it down, I added. Shut up. Don't boss me around, he snapped back. When he's drunk, he's out of control. All I can do in situations like these is stay quiet and endure it. I think I'm reaching my breaking point. I began to entertain the idea, but the thought of facing loneliness again was heart-wrenching. I was torn between enduring the current situation or spending the rest of my life alone. The idea of divorce started to weigh heavily on my mind. Then, out of nowhere, Ken brought up the idea of living with his parents. What? You mean they'd move in here? I asked, surprised. No, they'll move in here, Ken replied as if it was already decided that they would move in, without even discussing it with me. While I understand the desire to be close to aging parents, both of Ken's parents are still healthy. I couldn't understand why they would want to leave their own home to come live with us. Do they really need to stay here? It's going to be crowded with 4 people and I work from home, so it'll be inconvenient, I expressed my concerns. You're always thinking about yourself, huh? I never thought you were this selfish, Ken accused. I'm just saying, why do they need to move here when they have their own place? Our place is bigger, more modern, and has all the conveniences. Plus, it's accessible for elderly people, I reasoned. If Ken's parents moved in, I'd have to be on my toes during work hours. Ken is rarely home, but his parents would likely be around a lot since they're retired. Sharing the bathroom, kitchen. I already move slower than most people, and I could easily imagine the strain of such a living situation. Can I have some time to think? I asked. You better hurry up. We don't have much time, Ken replied curtly. Despite Ken's insistence that there wasn't much time, he wasted no time in bringing his parents over by the weekend. It seemed like they had already discussed this move extensively. I've been thinking, maybe you should consider moving to a facility, Ken suggested. What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A facility for me? I was taken aback. Yeah, it's a good idea, right? You have your own limitations, right? In a facility, they take care of everything, Ken explained. It seemed like he wasn't just considering his parents moving in, but also the idea of sending me away. I'd visit you from time to time, he added casually. That statement jolted me awake. If not now, then when? Ken, what do you think I am to you, huh? You're my husband, right? Would you really tell your beloved wife to go to a facility? I confronted him. Hold on. When did I say I love you, Michelle? Ken's response made my anger boil. It was becoming increasingly clear that Ken was using me. Hadn't I known it all along? Wasn't it my fault for letting things get to this point? I felt like I needed to draw a line. Then, to my disbelief, Ken uttered even more shocking words. In this house, I'm going to live with my parents. You, an outsider, can go live in some cheap facility, he declared. What'd you just say? I looked to his parents, hoping for some support, but they just had unsettling grins on their faces. Why are you laughing? I demanded. What's the big deal, huh? Ken's parents responded with indifference. It seemed like things had been escalating too quickly lately. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe they had their eyes on my home even before we got married. I knew I had to act fast and get these people out. Please leave, I said firmly. What? Leave now, I reiterated when they hesitated. How could you talk to my parents like that? Ken snapped, his anger boiling over. It was like I was seeing the real Ken for the first time. He was yelling at me with such fury. If he cared so much for his parents, why didn't he work hard and build them a house? Why did he have to take mine? My head felt like it was on fire. It's okay, Ken. Michelle must have been shocked since we came unexpectedly. His mother intervened. We just came to check the place today, his father added. Yeah, we need to check before moving in. Looks like there are more appliances than last time. Seems comfy to live in. It became clear they were here to stake a claim on my home. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself as I filled my lungs with oxygen. Then, a sudden question popped into my mind. If I leave, how are they planning to survive? His parents are on a pension, and Ken's just a part-timer. I'm covering all the rent and living expenses. Who's going to pay the $2,800 a month? Do his parents think Ken's earning the living expenses? I voiced my concerns, but they were ignored as his parents cheerfully left. Ken followed them. I'm going to stay at my parents' tonight. Hold on, we need to talk, he said as he left. There's nothing to talk about. "I, the man of the house, have decided. I won't change my mind," he declared before leaving me alone in shock. But I couldn't just stay like that. I immediately called a real estate agent I knew. Ken didn't return that night, probably celebrating with his parents. I quickly sorted out essential and non-essential belongings. When Ken returned the next day, he saw the organized stuff and laughed. "Oh, started packing. Found a place to move to already?" Ken asked, surprised by my swift action. "Yes, I have," I replied, handing him a card. "And here's the card of a divorce lawyer. Here you go, Ken. From now on, let's communicate through the lawyer." "A divorce? Why? If you're kicking me out, there's no point in being married anymore, right?" Ken tried to reason. Ken seemed taken aback by the mention of divorce. "You can't live without me, right?" he added, almost as a question. "I don't understand what you mean. Who else would marry you?" Ken responded, his arrogance showing. "I can live on my own, but you said you wanted to get married," I reminded him. It was only then that I realized how arrogant and overconfident Ken was. He approached me thinking I was a lonely, disabled single woman. "I'm independent, have money, and never struggle with my living. Plus, I stay home all the time, so I handle all the chores for him. I'm the ideal woman. Money keeps coming in even if he doesn't work." He thought I wouldn't leave because I couldn't find anyone else. That's why he was shocked when I casually brought up divorce. "Why?" "You know, if you divorce me, you might be single for the rest of your life," Ken warned, revealing his insecurity. "Well, if it means living a married life with you, I'd rather be single forever," I asserted. "Whether I spend the rest of my life alone isn't for you to decide," I added, my usually submissive demeanor giving way to defiance. Ken seemed flustered, and I could tell he was panicking. I never thought he was such a weak man. I realized I had been putting up with him for far too long. Once I made the decision to divorce him, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had been too focused on getting married. "Anyway, you don't have to move out right away. I didn't mean to rush you into a facility that soon," I said. "Oh, it's fine. I'll do as you wish. Don't worry, you won't find a place that fast. Think it over, okay?" Ken replied, trying to regain control of the situation. "I've already secured a place, so it's all right," I informed Ken. "What? Wait a minute, isn't this too soon?" Ken responded, clearly taken aback. I observed Ken's shifting attitudes, from smugness to panic. Dealing with him was becoming increasingly irritating as I calmed down. "The facility staff are informed and know about my situation, so everything's fine," I reassured him, determined to move forward with my decision. "When did you even set all this up? Were you preparing all along?" Ken asked, clearly surprised by my sudden revelation. "Yes, even before I met you, actually. I had been considering my retirement and had my eye on a certain facility. It's more like a condo. After an injury during my hospital stay, I read various investment books. I had decided to invest in stocks and real estate. I had diversified investments between my salary and my parents' inheritance. The facility I had my eye on, I had already purchased and had been renting it out for income. I never mentioned this to Ken. "It's my hidden asset," I explained. "We don't need to get a divorce." "I get it. You can stay here. Let's live with my parents," Ken suggested. "Do you not get it? Why would I ever do that?" I responded firmly, feeling empowered by my newfound independence and decision-making. He seems pretty dense. Even after bringing up divorce, he still seems to believe he's the only one for me, I thought to myself. "Sorry, but my mind's made up. What's your problem?" I confronted Ken. "You're so selfish. If you come crying back later, it's not my problem," Ken retorted. "I won't be, so don't worry," I replied confidently, determined to move forward without him. Ken fell silent, lost in thought. Hours passed as I continued packing up my things. Then, I overheard Ken making a phone call. It seemed like he was speaking to his parents. It struck me as pathetic that he needed to rely on them for such decisions. Eventually, Ken approached me. "Fine, we'll get a divorce. Just leave quickly," he said begrudgingly. Perhaps he would miss having me around to take care of the household chores. But he likely saw living with his parents as a way to avoid them. With that, Ken left for his parents' home. "I'm going to talk to my folks about what's next. Get ready to move out quickly," he informed me. "Yes, I'll do that," I replied, ready to start a new chapter of my life without him. I finished moving all my stuff within a week. During that time, Ken never showed up. We met again a day after the move was completed. As I was settling into my new home, Ken called me outside and asked, "Hey, what's going on? This place is almost empty. Where are the appliances?" "I had a service pick up those items for me," I replied calmly. "What?" "I had called a service the next day and had them collect all the furniture and appliances," Ken exclaimed, clearly agitated. My husband's frustration grew and he began grumbling. Not only Ken but also his parents were there. "All the appliances here were bought by me. They are all from when I was single. The only thing that's yours is right there," he pointed out. There were only 3 cardboard boxes. "I did leave the clear clothing container we bought after marriage," I added. "Michelle, we can't live with this. We need to split the property if we're divorcing," Ken insisted. "That's right. We can't live here like this," his mother chimed in. "What are you talking about? Nobody can live here," Ken protested. "What do you mean? The rent's $2,000, I clarified, confused by their sudden concern. You could see the shock on Ken and his parents' faces. I reminded Ken of something I had told him when we got married. "This isn't your own house." "No, it isn't. I got a bit of a discount on the rent because I asked a real estate agent," I explained. "I know if I move out, the rent will go up even more, given that this is a property with disability access, and I've already received several inquiries from people with the same concerns. I recommended that they move out. Why didn't you tell us sooner?" "What are we going to do now?" Ken asked, clearly flustered. "I don't know. I did tell Ken. I didn't hear about it. I'll sue you," his mother threatened, her frustration boiling over. I saw that coming, honestly. From an outsider's perspective, it might look like I selfishly got a divorce, broke the lease, and took all the furniture and appliances. But I was sure. I reflected. "You can sue, but do you even have the money for it?" Ken's face contorted with frustration. It was clear he couldn't afford a lawyer, even if he wanted to. I revealed my ace up my sleeve by showing them some pictures. "When did you take these?" Ken exclaimed in shock as he saw the images of himself gambling and womanizing. "I spent my money on this. I'm ready to use these in court, Ken," I warned. "What the hell? I thought everything was going well." Ken's parents expressed their agitation. "What's going on?" Suddenly, Ken started to apologize. "I'm sorry. Please come back. I need you, Michelle," he pleaded, his tone filled with desperation. "You're the one who made me leave. We're not married anymore, so what's the point? And do you even care about me? If not, I'll just go." Even Ken's parents started saying sorry beside him. "We don't have a home anymore." This was a shock. "What do you mean?" "Our house got taken away because we couldn't pay for it. Ken's family will lose their home in a few weeks. They ran out of money. Ken's dad owed a lot, and it got bigger over time. Ken used to get money from his parents, but when he got married, he probably hoped for more support. Now I get why his mom was nice to me before we got married. I can't do anything for you now. We're not close anymore. Even if my parents and I have nowhere to go, does that not bother you? You caused this situation, right? Can you at least give me the electronics and furniture? You're wealthy, Michelle. Are you going to sell them?" His real reason was obvious. I told him firmly that I wouldn't give him anything, not even one piece of furniture or electronics. "Please reconsider. Show some kindness. It's too late to say sorry now. You need to figure this out on your own." "That's exactly why I'm asking for help. I can't figure it out," I told Ken and his dad, who kept asking. If they couldn't pay the rent, they should leave. The place is in my name, so if I cancel the lease, they have to go. Evicting them was easy. Even if the lease was transferred, Ken probably couldn't afford to live here. I got all this information from the real estate agent. I can't afford the rent, so I decided to cancel the lease. I don't need this place anymore, and since our divorce is final, it's all over. I managed to get the shocked family out and locked the door. What do we do now? I can move to a different place. Goodbye. Places like that must be awful, right? Good luck in that terrible place. Ken probably felt he needed to get the last word in, so he spat out those bitter words. I ignored him and his parents and left. But Ken wasn't done. A few days later, he showed up at the facility where I had moved. "What's going on here?" Ken looked like he was going to pass out when he saw where I was living. "This place isn't bad at all. It's actually a luxury facility worth $1 million. I had saved up money and invested it. and that's how I bought this place. The timing was perfect since the previous occupant had just left. With the money from selling my house and some extra income, I had plenty left over. This facility is great with doctors and helpers on hand. The rooms are like apartments with lots of privacy. It's a 3-bedroom, so families can stay together. There are even couples and families living here. I can call for help whenever I need it. And there's assistance with bathing every day. Originally, I thought this would be my last home, but I'm glad I moved here. You have that much money all along. Why? I don't want you to keep coming here. We're not close anymore. Please go. Then Ken started acting nice all of a sudden, but it felt weird. Can I stay here? What? No, that's not happening. We're not married anymore. Accept that. Then let's get married again. I'm staying in a motel. Isn't that sad? I can't find a job because I don't have a permanent address. At the motel, Ken is smooth with his words. It seems like he's forgotten about his own parents. In the end, he's only thinking about himself. Why don't you take a good look at yourself? It's sad to see you living off your parents at your age, being dependent after marriage, and now begging for help. Ken's face turned red. Aren't you embarrassed to be relying on your ex-wife? Look, everyone's watching, right? Residents peeking from their balconies were indeed watching. Actually, I had asked them beforehand to keep an eye out if my ex-husband showed up. I always expected him to come back for some reason. The residents were really helpful. They purposely looked at Ken with sympathy. It's like watching a real-life drama. I want to applaud them. Ken finally noticed the stares and seemed to realize how embarrassing his behavior was. I won't bother you anymore. With a pale face, he muttered those words and left. I doubt he'll come back here again. Later, when I went out, I bumped into my mother-in-law working at a supermarket checkout. My father-in-law worked as a janitor and my mother-in-law was a cashier. As soon as she saw me, she turned away and tried to hide. She was being scolded by a younger employee for her behavior. Ken was introduced to a job by someone he met at the motel cafe, but it turned out to be a poorly paid job where he was being taken advantage of. Meanwhile, I often host home parties and enjoy my life with others from the same facility. I've also made friends with other wheelchair users. If I had known such a supportive community existed, I would have moved here earlier. I make time for physical therapy sessions, and my current goal is to regain the ability to move my legs on my own. Overall, I lead a fulfilling life, both at work and in my personal time.
I go by Emily, aged 35, and for the past decade, I've dedicated myself to homemaking. My spouse, Michael, a doctor, and I have been leading a reasonably content life despite not having children. However, an unexpected event disrupted our 10-year marital journey. One evening, as Michael arrived home late, he dropped a bombshell. "This is the end for us, Emily," he declared abruptly. Bewildered, I questioned him. "What do you mean by the end? What's suddenly happening?" "I decided to marry my mistress, so we're getting divorced today," he declared nonchalantly. "Marry your mistress? What are you talking about?" "I've made up my mind. I'm leaving you and marrying her. Besides, we didn't marry for love, so you probably don't care, right?" Michael explained callously. Indeed, ours wasn't a love match. Michael's parents had orchestrated our union, and we barely knew each other before tying the knot hastily. The only commonality we shared was our original last name, a coincidence that seemed like fate during the rush of surrounding weddings. As we navigated through our wedding and marriage, I never fathomed that we would part ways after a decade. Despite lacking the foundation of a love marriage, we had lived together for 10 years. Now Michael wanted to marry someone else. It wasn't a love marriage, but we've lived together for 10 years, and now you suddenly want to marry your mistress. When did you start betraying me? I confronted him, grappling with the revelation. It's not betrayal. I met her about a year ago. She's a nurse who joined our hospital. She's charming, unlike you, always caring for me. And it's natural that I was drawn to her, Michael explained, justifying his decision. Natural. Are you serious? I responded, stunned by his revelation. Yes, I've always been serious. These 10 years living with you have been true hell. I was honestly sick and tired of supporting such a boring woman. But that ends today, he asserted coldly. How can you talk like that? It's the truth. You're a homemaker who produces nothing, while she's an active nurse. Ask any man in the country, they'd all choose her over you. Do you think a high-achieving doctor like me needs someone like you? Michael continued, his words cutting through me. After a brief pause, I mustered the strength to respond, fine, let's divorce. I never thought I'd be married to someone who could say such things so calmly. We can discuss alimony and property division later with a lawyer. I'll sign the divorce papers and send them later. Until then, I'll go back to my parents' house. However, Michael interrupted, revealing a shocking truth. No need for discussions. We don't even need a divorce paper. Perplexed, I questioned him. What do you mean? We can't separate without it. If we don't divorce, you can't remarry. You're so naive, it's pathetic. The truth is, I never submitted our marriage registration. We're not a married couple, just cohabitants. So there's no divorce, no alimony, no property division. You thought you'd get my money in the divorce, but you won't get a penny, Michael disclosed. Shocked by this revelation, I confronted him. Not submitted? Wait, are you joking? We've been living as a married couple for 10 years. It's impossible that you didn't submit it. Normally, yes. That's why I made that rule at the beginning. If you went to the office, everything would be ruined. When we got married, we made some rules. I, as a homemaker, would handle all the household chores. I was on an allowance, and part-time work was prohibited. Michael would handle all governmental and official matters, I recounted. Why would you do such a thing? I questioned. Because I was about to be forced into a marriage with someone I didn't love. It's not like I was going to submit it easily. I was saving marriage for someone I was destined to be with, Michael explained. Why didn't you refuse the marriage proposal in the first place? I demanded. I couldn't refuse. My parents are stubborn and wouldn't listen. I wanted a housekeeper. I'm a busy doctor and can't often tend to household chores. So, I decided to marry you as a housekeeper. It was a good deal for you too, right? You could eat well and have a roof over your head without working. You seemed desperate to get married too. What, you were probably feeling pressured because your friends were getting married, right? Even though we weren't actually married, you were seen as the woman who married a doctor. This 10-year relationship was a win-win for both of us, and it ends today. You should be grateful for the good times you had. Now you have to live on your own without relying on others, Michael declared, concluding our tumultuous chapter. I can't believe this. Oh, and one more thing. Don't tell my parents about this. If you do anything unnecessary, you know what will happen to your father, right? My father, who runs a medical equipment sales company, has a contract with the hospital where he works. It was through my marriage to him that this connection was made. If I told my in-laws, he's implying that he'd sever the contract as a threat. In other words, he's warning me not to take any action. It's your fault for being deceived. How pitiful to be thrown out with nothing, he said, laughing. But the one who would be thrown out without knowing anything was actually him. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. What's so funny all of a sudden? I can't believe you became a doctor with that kind of knowledge, he questioned. I knew all along about your mistress and that you didn't submit our marriage registration, I replied calmly. That's impossible, he insisted. That's why I've been preparing, waiting for the day you'd bring it up yourself. In fact, I had suspected his infidelity for the past 6 months, but I didn't have enough evidence to confront him. So I hired a private investigator to look into his affair. Ma'am, there are 2 things I need to tell you. The first is that your husband is indeed having an affair. We got evidence of him entering a hotel with a nurse from his workplace. And the second is from their conversations. There's a possibility that you two are not legally married. Possibility of not being legally married? What does that mean? I asked, shocked. I overheard your husband and his mistress at a cafe. He said they didn't need to worry about alimony or property division since they never submitted a marriage registration, the investigator revealed. I can't believe it. We've been living as a married couple for 10 years. I don't know why he didn't submit the marriage registration. That's why he never let me handle any official procedures, I realized. Yeah, that seems to be the case. I can't believe this. How could this happen? I explained. It's rare to hear about not submitting a marriage registration for 10 years, but it's not unheard of. This is too much. Am I just supposed to accept this? If we were never married from the start, there's nothing I can do, I lamented. Not necessarily. What do you mean? The investigator asked. Let's make him pay for deceiving you for 10 years. First, we need to prepare without him noticing, I declared. And so, I began to prepare with the investigator to punish my husband. So what if you knew we were never married from the start? So it doesn't matter what I do with other women. I don't need to take any responsibility, he said, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit him. I pitied myself for not knowing anything. But it seems you were the one truly pitiful. What do you mean? We're considered to be in a common law relationship on paper. So what? You might not know, but you can actually claim alimony and divide property in a common law relationship. What he didn't know was that registering as a de facto marriage would backfire on him. You can make claims in a common law relationship. It's not well known, but yes, you can. Of course, there are some conditions, but looking at your case, it seems you meet them. What are these conditions? A common law relationship is established based on 2 criteria. First, both parties must have the intention to marry. If it's just living together, that's cohabitation. Mutual intent to marry is key. For instance, if you had a wedding ceremony or were recognized as a couple by others, it can be acknowledged. We've had a wedding ceremony, and our parents and friends know us as a couple. Then the first criterion is met. The second is living as if married. This includes sharing household life for over 3 years. You've been living together as a couple for over 10 years, and as a homemaker, you obviously shared the household finances. This is recognized as a marital relationship. So that means if you can provide proof of what we discussed, you can claim alimony and divide property. I'm not an expert in this area, so I'll introduce you to a lawyer. You can work with them to bring him down. After consulting with the lawyer, I was told that I could indeed claim alimony and property division from my husband. So I'm going to demand alimony and property division from you, I informed my husband, who turned pale. His confidence, which had looked down on me just a moment ago, was gone. But even if you can claim alimony and property division, you're just an unemployed woman. Do you plan to rely on your parents after being kicked out? He scoffed. Didn't I say I was preparing? I've already found a job starting next month. I've also got my eye on a new place. Don't worry about me, I responded confidently. What he thought, that a clueless homemaker would be helpless, had backfired. I'll make sure to discuss this with your parents, just so you know. Do you not care what happens to your father if they want to break the contract? He challenged. Let them. Sure, you were the link to the hospital, but the contract continued because of my father and his company's efforts. Whether or not they keep the contract is up to them. Let's see if they'll break a contract just because the doctor's wife of 10 years was a lie. Try saying that to my father and me. We won't be affected if the contract is broken over this. It only shows the depth of their trust. We'll just find another hospital to partner with, I asserted. Saying this, I took out my phone. You're not calling your parents, are you? He questioned. That's exactly what I'm doing. Our parents think we're still married. It's only natural to inform them if this relationship is ending, I stated. To my surprise, my husband began to apologize. Please let me talk to them. Don't call, he pleaded. Why? You know how strict my parents are. If they find out about this, I'm done, he explained. What does that have to do with me? You're asking me not to tell the truth because your parents are strict. Are you kidding? You could have refused the marriage from the start if you didn't intend to marry. After 10 years of a selfish marriage, You're afraid of your parents finding out. I can't accept such a convenient story, I retorted. But I can accept your story. I'll make sure to tell both your parents and mine, I declared. And so, I called both sets of parents. All four were shocked upon hearing my story, and a meeting was promptly arranged at our house. I've heard everything over the phone. Is it true that you pretended to be married for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration? Speak up, you foolish son, my father scolded. It's true. I didn't submit it. Why would you do such a thing? Didn't you think about how Emily would feel? My mother added. I had no choice. No choice, you say? How can you even say that? It's actually your fault, Dad and Mom. I didn't want to get married, yet you started looking for a bride on your own, saying it was time, he explained. I got married because you arranged meetings and tried to force a marriage on me. You're the one who agreed to the marriage, aren't you? I had to agree. If I had refused, you would have made a fuss about it, so I decided to get married. If you were resolved to marry, why didn't you submit the marriage registration? I read about a man on the internet who was in the same situation. He didn't want to marry but had to because of his parents. He lived a married life without submitting the registration, then revealed the truth when he found someone he truly loved. That's appalling. And what happened to that guy in the end, he asked. He's now married to the person he loves and has a real marriage. So I too will marry my girlfriend and have a real marriage. Then my parents, who had been silent until now, spoke up after hearing his reasoning. A real marriage, huh? Sure, you might not have had a love marriage, but do you remember what you said at the wedding? We will never forget to care for each other and build a home full of smiles. What did those words mean to you? What were we shown? We sent our daughter to you hoping for her happiness, but you deceived her for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration. Did you build a home full of smiles? Now you're leaving her for another woman. Can someone who acts without a shred of care, even if they change partners, truly have a real marriage? Well, he began, but my father-in-law interrupted. I was happy you married our daughter, not just because you were a doctor. I thought she could build a happy home with someone as sincere as you. But it seems we were mistaken and deceived. And you threatened our daughter. If she told us about this, you'd cut off the contract with our company. Seriously. If you're going to threaten our daughter, we'll cut off the contract ourselves. Be warned, we will tell the truth when asked. Why? If you do that, there will be rumors at the hospital. Well, yes, but that's the result of your own actions. You were the one who threatened us with cutting off the contract. My husband was in complete panic at this unexpected turn of events. Please wait. This is getting out of hand. Let's just talk, he pleaded. At that moment, my father-in-law grabbed him by the collar, furious. Don't mess with us. We didn't raise you to be such a scoundrel. What were you thinking, father? Please stop. By not submitting the marriage registration, you might have thought you were doing yourself a favor. But because of your selfish actions, Emily was strung along for 10 years. What were you thinking, causing such trouble to others? The living room fell silent. My husband, faced with my father-in-law's words, had nothing more to say. Emily and your parents, I'm truly sorry for the trouble caused by this idiot, my father-in-law said. No, you parents shouldn't apologize. It's not your fault. However, it's partly our responsibility as parents for letting him act this way. For now, we'll take him home and make sure he doesn't continue his reckless behavior. We'll deal with the aftermath properly. We're very sorry for all this. And with that, my husband was taken away by his parents back to his childhood home. You've been through a lot. For now, you should come back home and rest. We'll think about what to do next later. You don't need to worry about anything right now, my parents said, thinking I was completely exhausted and deceived. They spoke to me with such kindness. Thank you, but I won't go back home yet. I still have things I need to do. I declined their offer and stayed in my own home. What I had to do was prepare for the final settlement with my now ex-husband. Gathering evidence for our common law relationship, I was getting ready to claim alimony and divide our assets. A few weeks later, A meeting with a lawyer was arranged. However, even if I agree with alimony, why should I divide my property? She's been a homemaker for 10 years, never working a day. All the furniture, clothes, food. I paid for everything. Now you're telling me to hand over the money I worked hard for, the furniture I bought. He ranted, unable to accept that his money would be shared with me. Yes, that's correct. The money you earned and the furniture are subject to property division, the lawyer explained. Why does it have to be like that? He protested. Who did the housework? While you were working, who cooked meals with the groceries you bought? That's irrelevant now. No, it's very relevant. A homemaker is entitled to property division because housework and child care have economic value. Speaking as a human, not just a lawyer, do you think housework is something anyone can do, that it's just expected of a homemaker? The reason you could live freely is because of her support. Don't get that wrong. And this situation is a result of your actions, yet you have the audacity to be selfish, the lawyer continued. What'd you say? Never mind. Anyway, she's entitled to half of the assets for property division. That's how it is. Dan, regarding alimony, we intend to claim $100,000 from you. $100,000? Why so much for a relationship that wasn't even a marriage? It's precisely because you weren't married. Normally, alimony claims in common law relationships range from $10,000 to $40,000. However, in your case, you pretended to be married for 10 years and selfishly tried to kick her out when you found someone else. The amount is determined by the severity and duration of your actions. But still, you may think 10 years is just a short time, but it's longer than you realize. During that time, she devoted herself to you, believing you were a married couple. You have no right to complain after betraying her. A perfect rebuttal left him speechless, and he reluctantly agreed to my demands. Then I also sent a notice of claim for alimony to his mistress. I knew who and where she was, thanks to the investigator, as she was a nurse working at the same hospital. The mistress, having heard from him that there was no possibility of alimony or property division, must have been utterly shocked by the contents of the claim. Wait a minute, this isn't what you told me. What you want? She confronted him at the hospital with the notice I had sent. I told you not to talk to me at the hospital. I got this from your wife. You said there wouldn't be any alimony because we weren't married. What's this all about? I later learned that, in a panic after being served with the alimony claim from me, she confronted him at the hospital with the notice I had sent. Okay. Let's talk about this later, not here. There are too many people around. We'll both be in trouble if this turns into a rumor. I don't care about that. I can't pay this kind of alimony. You said it was okay, so you should pay. Pay it for me. I won't pay a penny. You were the one who wanted this relationship. You said I was the only one for you, that you wanted to marry me. Hey, quiet down. Everyone can hear us. Just so you know, I'm not in the wrong here. If you want to make amends with your wife, do it yourself. Tell her I don't owe her a penny, that you'll take care of everything. This exchange led to the revelation of their affair to the entire hospital. It quickly became the talk of the place, and then the final blow was my father's request to the hospital. I apologize, but we would like to terminate our contract at the end of next month. The hospital, aware of the rumors, asked my father, "Excuse me for asking, but is the reason for canceling the contract related to Dr. Michael's affair? It's already become a rumor." Yes, a nurse presumed to be involved caused quite a scene. I never imagined he had been pretending to be married for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration. I never expected it to turn out like this. You mean he never submitted the registration? Weren't you aware that he hadn't submitted the marriage registration? All we knew was that he, being married, had an affair. What do you mean he didn't submit the marriage registration? With my father's request, it was revealed that he had been deceiving me for 10 years by not submitting the marriage registration. This news spread among the other nurses. Dr. Michael deceived his wife for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration, and he had an affair with a nurse. How low? How could he do that? Can someone really not notice for 10 years? Apparently, Emily's maiden name was the same, and he managed all the official paperwork. That's scary. The rumors spread not only among hospital staff, but also to patients, and both Michael and his mistress received cold stares. Unable to endure, they soon resigned from the hospital. As my father told me, "Did you manage to get the alimony?" "Yes, I received payments from both him and his mistress." She refused to pay until the end, claiming she was deceived, but the lawyer made it clear her argument wouldn't hold, and she reluctantly agreed to pay. That's good. What about you, Dad? Did the contract get canceled after all? No, that's off the table. He resigned, and since our company is trusted, the hospital asked us not to cancel the contract. We couldn't cancel it after they asked like that. That's a relief. Then I started a new life in a new place and was living happily. About a year and a half later, my ex-husband contacted me. "Is it true you got remarried?" I had married a man I met at work, and somehow he had found out. I wondered whose number this was, going through the trouble of changing your number just to contact me. Just answer my question. Yes, I got married. You betrayed me. Betray? We were never legally married, so I didn't think it would matter to you. Right? That's a different matter indeed. Things are different now. We're completely separated, so my marriage has nothing to do with you. Is that why you contacted me? After I said this, he seemed at a loss for words. Then he taunted, "Of course, you're still unmarried, since you probably haven't submitted a marriage registration again. You're that kind of woman." But things weren't as he imagined. Unfortunately for you, my husband isn't the kind of person to do such terrible things. He knows all about your story, so to ensure I wouldn't feel anxious, we went to the office together to submit the registration. Sadly for you, things aren't as you thought. I can somewhat understand your wish for me to be unhappy. Considering your own misery, but sorry you're happily married. I told him this and hung up the phone. What kind of life he leads now, I don't know. But unless he changes his selfish nature, it's unlikely he'll ever find happiness.
Clara exhaled heavily as she folded the last piece of laundry in their cramped apartment. It had been a grueling day at school, and all she longed for was a quiet evening. Reaching for Mark's jacket to toss it in the wash, her hand stilled. A crumpled envelope peeked out of the pocket. Curiosity tugged at her, and she pulled it free, smoothing out the creases. Her heart sank. Eviction notice. The bold red letters at the top hit her like a punch to the chest. The letter spelled out that they were 3 months behind on rent. Clara's mind raced. How could this have happened? She had trusted Mark to handle the bills while she managed their household. "Mark," she called, her voice trembling, not with anger, but fear. Mark appeared in the doorway, his easy smile fading as soon as he saw the paper in her hands. "What's this?" Clara demanded, her voice unsteady. Mark hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck, a telltale sign of his nervousness. "I can explain," he began, but Clara cut him off. "Explain what? That we're about to lose our home? That you've been hiding this from me for months?" Mark stepped forward, reaching for the notice. "Clara, listen, it's not what you think. I had to help Sophia. She needed money for the kids' school fees, and then the car broke down." Clara's eyes widened in disbelief. "You gave our rent money to your sister? She's been struggling since her husband passed," Mark said defensively. "I couldn't just let her go under." Clara's anger surged. "So instead, you decided to let us go under?" She waved the notice in his face. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Or were you planning to wait until we were out on the street?" Mark tried to take her hands, but she pulled away. "I was going to fix it," he said, his voice quieter now. "I've been working extra hours. I thought I could catch up before it got this far." "Fix it?" Clara repeated, her voice rising. "With what money, Mark? Our savings are gone, aren't they? Mark's silence was all the confirmation she needed. Clara turned away, her thoughts spiraling. Their home, their life, it all felt like a lie. And for what? So Sophia could keep up appearances? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Sophia herself. Can't wait for family dinner tomorrow. Love you both. The irony stung, and Clara let out a bitter laugh. Sophia, who was supposedly struggling, had time to plan dinners while they faced eviction. I can fix this, Mark said again, his voice pleading now. I just need more time. Clara stared at him, the man she'd married 5 years ago, now a stranger. You made your choice, Mark, she said coldly. And it wasn't me. Mark froze in the doorway as Clara turned back to the laundry. She didn't know how they would get through this, but one thing was certain, the trust between them had shattered. The next morning, Clara woke early. Sleep had been elusive, her mind replaying the events of the night before. The eviction notice sat on the kitchen counter, glaring at her like a bad omen. She sipped her coffee, staring at it, her thoughts a tangled mess. How had they gotten to this point? Had she been blind to Mark's actions, too trusting to see the warning signs? Mark was still asleep, or pretending to be. Clara didn't care. She needed space. Grabbing her bag, she left the apartment, letting the door slam behind her. Her destination was clear, Tina. Tina's office was in the heart of downtown Portland. Clara had barely texted her friend a brief summary of the situation before Tina called back, her tone sharp and concerned. Get here. Now. When Clara arrived, Tina was waiting outside, leaning against the building with 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. This better be a joke, Tina said, handing one to Clara as they started walking. I wish it was, Clara muttered. She recounted everything, the eviction notice, the drained savings, Mark's excuses, and Sophia's constant demands. Tina listened silently, her expression darkening with every word. When Clara finished, Tina stopped walking and turned to face her. You're telling me Mark gave away your savings without telling you? While you're working yourself to the bone to keep things afloat? Yes, Clara whispered. Saying it out loud only made the betrayal cut deeper. Tina sighed, shaking her head. This isn't just a bad decision, Clara. It's a betrayal. He didn't even give you a chance to weigh in, he just took from you. Clara's throat tightened. I keep asking myself why he didn't trust me enough to tell me. I could have helped figure something out. Because he didn't want to hear no, Tina said bluntly. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission, especially when he's trying to please Sophia. The mention of Sophia made Clara's blood boil. She's been living with us for months, Tina. Months? I thought she was trying to get back on her feet, Clara said, her voice tight. But now it feels like she's just using us, and Mark's letting her. Tina gave her a long look. You need to figure out where your line is, Clara. What's the limit before you've had enough? Clara didn't answer. She wasn't sure where her limit was yet, but she knew she was getting close. That evening, Clara returned home to find Sophia sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. The television blared a reality show in the background, and the faint smell of popcorn lingered in the air. Her 2 young children darted around the living room, toys scattered everywhere. Clara. Sophia called brightly, as if everything was fine. Dinner's almost ready. Hope you don't mind, I used that fancy pasta you bought last week. The kids were craving something special. Clara clenched her jaw. Fancy pasta. The same pasta she and Mark had been saving for a rare date night. Forcing a tight smile, she replied, no problem, and walked into the kitchen, where Mark was stirring a pot on the stove. He looked up, guilt etched across his face. Clara, not now, she cut him off, her voice sharp. She grabbed a glass of water and left, ignoring the tension that clung to the air like a storm cloud. The next day, Clara sat in her classroom during her lunch break, staring at her phone. A notification had popped up from Sophia's Instagram account. Against her better judgment, she opened it. The post showed Sophia's kids in brand new outfits, holding shopping bags from an upscale mall. The caption read, fresh start, new beginnings, so blessed. Clara's stomach churned. How could Sophia flaunt expensive purchases while they were on the brink of eviction? Frustration bubbled up inside her, and she texted Tina immediately, "Wine, my place, tonight." Tina arrived that evening with 2 bottles of red wine and a grim expression. As Clara vented, pouring out the details of Sophia's latest outrage, Tina shook her head. "She's bragging about her life on Instagram while draining yours? And Mark just stands by and lets her?" "Exactly," Clara exclaimed. "Then stop letting him," Tina said firmly, pouring Clara a generous glass of wine. "You don't owe them anything, Clara. If they're going to treat you like a doormat, it's time to show them the door." Clara stared at the swirling wine in her glass. Tina was right, but it wasn't that simple. She had loved Mark. She had trusted him. Letting go of their life together wasn't a decision she could take lightly. The family dinner the following evening was everything Clara had expected, and worse. Sophia arrived early with a casserole dish, immediately taking charge of the kitchen as if it were her home. Mark hovered around her, eager to help and hanging on her every word. Sophia played the role of the grieving widow, her children once again the center of attention. Clara sat through it all in silence, her appetite gone. She listened as Sophia's mother, Linda, praised Mark for being such a good brother and scolded Clara for not being more understanding of family struggles. Finally, Clara had enough. She set her fork down with a sharp clink and looked directly at Sophia. "Do you want to tell everyone the truth, or should I?" The room fell silent. Sophia blinked, feigning innocence. "What do you mean?" "I mean the truth about where the money really went, the shopping, the trips, the expensive meals," Clara said, her voice steady, despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "The money Mark took from me to give to you." Linda gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Mark's face drained of color, and he looked as though he wanted to disappear. Sophia's face hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Clara pulled her phone from her pocket, opened the screenshots of Sophia's Instagram posts, and slid it across the table. "Don't you? Because this doesn't look like someone who's struggling." Sophia glanced at the screen, her face pale. I was going to pay it back," she stammered. "When?" Clara demanded. "After we were homeless? You've been lying to us this whole time, Sophia, using your kids as an excuse to live off us while we fall apart." Linda tried to interject, but Clara held up a hand. "No, Linda, you don't get to lecture me about family loyalty when your daughter has been stealing from me." The table was silent. Clara stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm done," she said, her voice firm. "I won't let you drag me down with you." Without waiting for a response, she walked out, leaving them to sit in the mess they had created. Back at the apartment, Clara began packing her things. She didn't know what her next step would be, but one thing was certain: she couldn't stay. As she folded clothes into a suitcase, Mark appeared in the doorway, his voice heavy with emotion. "Clara, please don't do this. We can fix it." She looked at him, the man she had once loved so deeply, now a stranger. "You made your choice, Mark," she said quietly, "and it wasn't me." Mark's shoulders slumped as Clara zipped up her suitcase. The weight of his betrayal hung heavy between them, and Clara knew it was a burden she could no longer carry. Tina placed a steady hand on Clara's shoulder. "You're not walking away, Clara, you're rebuilding. Trust me, this time, you're going to build something so much stronger." The next day, Clara's phone buzzed with a message from Mark. It was brief and to the point. "Can we talk? Just us." Clara stared at the text for a long moment, her emotions swirling in a storm of anger, sadness, and curiosity. Part of her wanted to ignore it entirely. Another part, the part that remembered the man she'd fallen in love with, wanted answers. After a deep breath, she typed back, "Fine, tomorrow, at the park." The following afternoon, Clara arrived early at the park. She sat on a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, her hands stuffed in her coat pockets as the chilly Portland air nipped at her cheeks. She watched children laughing and playing on the nearby playground, their joy a bittersweet reminder of simpler times. Mark arrived a few minutes later, looking tired and disheveled. His once pristine appearance had given way to wrinkled clothes and a shadow of stubble. "Thanks for meeting me," he said quietly, sitting beside her. Clara didn't respond right away. She kept her gaze on the playground, watching a father push his daughter on a swing. Finally, she turned to Mark, her expression hard. "What do you want?" Mark sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "I messed up, Clara, I know I did. I should have told you about the money, the bills, everything. I thought I could fix it on my own." "By lying to me?" Clara shot back, her voice sharp. By taking our savings without even asking? Mark flinched as if her words physically struck him. I didn't mean to hurt you, I was just trying to help. Sophia, she's been through so much, losing her husband, raising 2 kids alone. And what about me, Mark? Clara interrupted, her voice rising. What about us? Do you think this hasn't been hard for me too? I was your partner, you were supposed to trust me. Instead, you chose to betray me. I didn't see it that way, Mark said quietly, his voice tinged with regret. I thought I was doing the right thing. For who? Clara asked, her eyes narrowing. Because it sure wasn't for us. Mark looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumping. You're right, he admitted. I let my guilt over Sophia's situation cloud my judgment. I put her needs above yours, above ours. And I'm sorry. Clara shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Sorry doesn't fix this, Mark. Sorry doesn't pay the rent or undo the damage you've done. I know, Mark said, his voice earnest, but I want to make it right. I've started therapy. I've been talking to my boss about taking on extra work to pay back what I took. I'm trying, Clara. Clara stared at him, searching his face for a glimpse of the man she had once trusted implicitly. She could see the regret in his eyes, but regret wasn't enough. Trust, once broken, wasn't so easily repaired. I appreciate that you're trying, she said finally, but I don't know if I can forgive you for this. Mark nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting her response. I understand, but I'm not giving up on us, Clara, not yet. Clara didn't reply. She wasn't sure what to say. Part of her wanted to believe him, to cling to the hope that they could rebuild what had been lost. But another part, the part that had been betrayed, wasn't ready to let go of her anger. Later that evening, Clara returned to the apartment for the first time in days. Mark wasn't home, but Sophia was. She sat on the couch, her children playing quietly on the floor. When Clara walked in, Sophia looked up, her expression a mix of guilt and defiance. Clara, Sophia said hesitantly, standing as if to greet her, can we talk? Clara crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. What is there to talk about, Sophia? You've already said enough with your actions. Sophia wrung her hands nervously. I know I've messed up. I know I've taken advantage of you and Mark. And I'm sorry. Are you? Clara asked coldly, because it didn't seem like you were sorry when you were posting pictures of your shopping trips and new clothes while we were struggling to keep a roof over our heads. Sophia winced, her shoulders slumping. I was trying to keep up appearances. After Tham died, I didn't know how to handle everything, the bills, the kids, the loneliness. It all felt like too much. So I made bad choices. Bad choices that hurt other people, Clara said, her tone unyielding. Do you even realize the position you put us in? I do now, Sophia said, her voice cracking. I've been selfish, and I see that now. I want to make things right, Clara. Clara studied her sister-in-law for a long moment. There was sincerity in Sophia's voice, but Clara wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. Then start by fixing your own life, Clara said firmly. Stop expecting others to carry you while you drag them down, because I'm done. Sophia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I will, I promise. Clara didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked to her room, shutting the door behind her. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of peace, not from reconciliation, but from drawing her boundaries and reclaiming her space. Sophia stood with tears streaming down her face, her voice trembling with sincerity. I will, Clara. I promise I'll make things right. Clara stared at her, unsure whether to believe the words. Sophia had always been good at playing the victim, but this time there was something different in her tone, something genuine. We'll see, Clara said finally, her voice steady. Actions speak louder than words. Sophia, if you really want to make things right, show me. Sophia nodded, wiping her tears. I will, I promise. That night, Clara sat alone in the apartment, her mind racing. The confrontation with Sophia had left her drained but also strangely hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, things could change, but she knew better than to let her guard down. Promises were easy to make, but much harder to keep. As she stared out the window at the city lights, Clara realized one thing with clarity: she needed to prioritize herself. She couldn't keep sacrificing her happiness and stability for others. It was time to take control of her own life. With a renewed sense of determination, she picked up her phone and started making a plan. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: no one else would dictate her path again. A week later, Clara sat in the corner booth of a small coffee shop in downtown Portland, a familiar spot from her marriage to Mark. This time, however, the visit felt different. She had requested to meet him here, not to rekindle anything, but to find closure for the unresolved. Mark arrived a few minutes late, his shoulders slightly hunched, his expression weary. He spotted Clara and gave her a hesitant wave before approaching the table. "Hey," he said, sitting down across from her. Clara nodded, folding her hands on the table. "Hey." The silence between them was heavy. Clara studied him for a moment. He looked thinner, older, as if the weight of everything had finally caught up with him. It wasn't anger she felt toward him anymore, just a quiet sadness. "I wanted to talk about what happens next," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. "It's time to make decisions." Mark nodded, his eyes dropping to the coffee cup in front of him. "I get it. I've been thinking about it too. I've been staying at a motel for now, but I found a roommate situation that's more permanent." Clara raised her eyebrows. "A roommate?" "Yeah," Mark said softly. "I need to figure out who I am without everything else, without Mom's influence, without Sophia leaning on me. I've started therapy too." "That's a good step," Clara said, surprised by his candor. Mark met her gaze for the first time. "I know I can't undo what I've done, Clara, but I want you to know I'm sorry, for breaking your trust, for not putting you first, for all of it." Clara nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, Mark, but this isn't just about apologies, it's about actions. I need to move forward, and I can't do that if I'm tied to this mess." Mark looked away, his jaw tightening. "Does that mean you're filing for divorce?" Clara exhaled. She had thought long and hard about this. "Yes," she said finally, "it's what's best for both of us. We need to start over separately." Mark nodded, his expression pained but accepting. "I understand. I don't want to hold you back anymore." For the first time in months, Clara felt a small weight lift off her shoulders. The decision, though painful, felt right. A week later, Clara was back at the apartment, boxing up her belongings. Mark had already moved out, leaving her the space to pack in peace. Sophia and her kids had left too, opting to stay with Linda temporarily. The quiet was both eerie and comforting. As she packed, Clara found an envelope tucked into one of the kitchen drawers. It was addressed to her, the handwriting unmistakably Sophia's. She opened it cautiously, expecting yet another apology. Instead, she found a check and a short note. "Clara, I know this doesn't fix everything, but it's a start. I've been working and saving, and I'm going to pay back every cent I owe you. Thank you for being the one who forced me to wake up. You didn't have to, but you did. I'll never forget it. Sophia." Clara stared at the check, her emotions a mix of surprise and disbelief. It wasn't a large amount, but it was a step, a tangible effort to repair the damage. Months passed. Clara moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town, closer to her school. The space was modest but cozy, filled with sunlight and the hum of new beginnings. She began focusing on herself for the first time in years, rediscovering hobbies she had once loved, like painting and hiking. Tina remained her constant support, their friendship growing even stronger. One evening, as Clara sat on her balcony, sketching the city skyline, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Tina. "You're going to want to see this. Check Sophia's Instagram." Clara hesitated before opening the app. Sophia had been quiet on social media for months, but her latest post showed her kids at a park, smiling wide as they played. The caption read, "Starting fresh, new job, new outlook, grateful for second chances." Clara stared at the screen, a small smile tugging at her lips. Maybe, just maybe, Sophia was turning things around. A year after everything had fallen apart, Clara found herself back at the same coffee shop, but this time for a different reason. She was meeting Tina to celebrate a milestone, her promotion to department head at her school. As Clara sipped her coffee, she thought about how far she had come. The pain of betrayal had lessened, replaced by a quiet strength. She no longer felt defined by the mistakes of others. Instead, she had rebuilt her life on her terms. "Here's to starting over," Tina said, raising her mug in a toast. Clara clinked her mug against Tina's, a genuine smile on her face. "Here's to growth." Outside the coffee shop, the city buzzed with life. Clara watched as people hurried past, each carrying their own stories of struggle and resilience. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace, no longer burdened by the weight of betrayal. She was free to embrace the future, a future she had built with her own strength and determination. Today, we say our final goodbye to Ryan, my beloved son who passed away. My heart aches even more because my husband, Mike, didn't even show up to his funeral. Frustrated and heartbroken, I decided to call him. His voice on the other end of the line was cheerful, a sharp contrast to my grief. I'm in Hawaii for my parents' 70th anniversary, he said, oblivious to the pain in my voice. When I told my mother, she was initially stunned, but her shock quickly turned into anger. What? They're in Hawaii? She exclaimed, her face reddening. Without hesitation, she resolved to confront Mike and his parents. I'm Emily, a 40-year-old office worker. Mike and I have been married for 10 years and share one child, our son, Ryan. For the past 2 years, Ryan has been fighting leukemia, a battle that has kept him hospitalized. Despite missing most of his early school days, his classmates would visit him, their presence bringing him joy. Ryan's resilience inspired us all, and his determination gave me strength. My parents were always there for Ryan, visiting him daily. My mom would often say how she looked forward to the day when Ryan could enjoy his favorite foods again. My dad, though diagnosed with dementia a few years ago, also made frequent visits. One day, mistaking me for a nurse, he said, "Thank you for taking care of my grandson." His words were bittersweet, though his memory of me faltered. His concern for Ryan remained unwavering. Ryan, wise beyond his years, understood his grandpa's condition and would kindly play along whenever my dad said something odd. Their bond was heartwarming, a sharp contrast to Ryan's relationship with his father. "Can't you visit Ryan sometimes? Don't you care about what he's going through?" I once asked Mike, desperate for his support. His response crushed me. "Ryan doesn't like me, so it's better if I stay away. Besides, I'm really busy." It was true that Ryan and Mike didn't get along. Mike had never been involved in Ryan's care, not even when he was a baby. Ryan, understandably, grew distant from his father. Whenever Mike had free time, he chose to spend it with his own parents, who also showed little interest in their grandson's health. "How can he be so heartless?" my mom said, her frustration evident. "And his parents, do they not care about Ryan at all?" I replied, half-jokingly, "Maybe I married the wrong person." I had fallen for Mike's kindness when we were dating, but he had become cold and indifferent to both me and Ryan. "If I'd known he was like this, I would never have introduced him to you," my mom said, regret coloring her voice. Mike and I had met through my uncle, who was friends with Mike's father. At the time, I wasn't seeing anyone, so I agreed to meet Mike. He seemed kind, and we hit it off. Before I knew it, we were dating seriously and eventually got married, but things changed after the wedding. Mike's parents, who had been warm and welcoming before, became controlling. My mother-in-law, who once greeted me with smiles, turned harsh. "You're part of this family now, Emily, and you'll do as I say. If not, we'll ensure you get a proper divorce," she once told me coldly. As I sit here now, grieving for Ryan, I can't help but wonder if I made a mistake trusting Mike and his family. I initially thought my father-in-law was a quiet man, but over time, his true colors began to show. He often made insulting remarks, saying things like, "We only let you marry Mike because the head of our family introduced you. Otherwise, there's no way we would have let someone like you marry our son." At first, I didn't understand his disdain. My uncle, who runs a real estate company, had introduced me to Mike. Apparently, during the introduction, my uncle mentioned that I came from a wealthy family. This led my father-in-law to assume that my father owned substantial properties. That assumption fueled his condescending attitude. I hadn't heard any of this from my father or uncle, so I initially believed my father-in-law's comments. After Mike and I got married, we moved into the house where my maternal grandparents had lived. They had passed away, and the house had been empty for some time. My parents planned to rent it out to prevent it from deteriorating, but when Mike found out about the house, he pleaded with my parents. "I promise we'll take good care of it, so please let us live there," he said. "It's close to her family, too, so we can help look after them." The arrangement made sense. The house was near both our families, which would allow us to keep an eye on our parents. However, having Mike's parents so close quickly became a burden. Mike would often invite his parents over and start bragging, saying things like, "Our house is so new, you must be jealous. It's so much bigger, maybe even twice the size of yours." While his father seemed irritated by the bragging, his mother would smile and say, "We could live here together. It might be old, but it's better than our place." After one such visit, I asked Mike directly, "Are you planning to have your parents move in with us? This isn't even your house." He laughed it off, claiming it was just a joke, but his mother's behavior suggested otherwise. Not long after, his parents began visiting frequently, inspecting the house as if they were preparing to move in. Living here would be better than our poor house, my father-in-law muttered one day. At least there's no rent in this dump. I was fuming when he called the house a dump, but my mother-in-law's actions were even worse. She ignored me completely while picking out a room for herself. When Mike didn't speak up, I decided to set the record straight. We're borrowing this house from my parents. My grandparents used to live here, so of course, it's a bit old, I explained. My in-laws looked surprised, but my father-in-law quickly retorted, "That's why it's in such poor condition." His tone was dismissive, and I thought the house was far better than where they lived. My mother-in-law, however, accused me of lying. "I trust my son more than you," she said. Her disbelief didn't change the facts, so I let the matter drop. Still, I was uneasy, worried they might push their way into moving in. That fear subsided when I discovered I was pregnant. The talk of them moving in abruptly stopped. Perhaps they realized that living with us would mean helping care for the baby. One day, I overheard my mother-in-law say, "Emily's parents should take care of the baby since they live nearby." I'm not doing it. I hadn't even asked for her help, but her comment stung. It was hard to fathom how she could be so indifferent about her first grandchild. When I told my mom about it, she just laughed. "Leave the babysitting to me," she said. "You don't need to ask someone who doesn't want to care for a sweet grandchild." She was right, and I decided to rely on my parents once the baby was born. When my son was born, my parents were overjoyed, but my in-laws only visited once. Even Mike's reaction was underwhelming. He didn't seem moved by the birth of our son, which was deeply disappointing. "Don't worry," my mom said, trying to reassure me. "Once the baby grows a little, Mike will feel more like a father." But as time went on, Mike showed no interest in our child. When our son turned 5, he fell ill. After several tests, the doctors diagnosed him with pediatric cancer. I was devastated, expecting Mike to support me through this unimaginable ordeal. Instead, he coldly said, "You'll have to cover the medical expenses yourself." "It's not my problem." His words broke me, leaving me to shoulder the weight of our son's illness and medical care alone. I was furious at my husband's attitude as a father. His lack of empathy was infuriating, but his mother's words cut even deeper. "It's because Emily passed on her genes that Ryan has cancer. None of our relatives have anything like that, so it must be her fault," she sneered. Hearing this, my father immediately stood up for me. "Don't you care about Ryan? We'll take care of him ourselves." "You can do whatever you want," he said, his voice firm and protective. My father's support forced my husband and in-laws to leave quietly. Even though I was already overwhelmed by my son's illness, their cruel remarks made everything harder. My mother, however, encouraged me. "Don't be discouraged. Ryan needs you to stay strong. We'll do everything we can to support you," she assured me. Bolstered by her words, I resolved to focus entirely on my son and not rely on my husband any longer. With my parents' help, I juggled work and Ryan's care. They were retired and dedicated themselves to supporting me, something for which I was endlessly grateful. Despite his diagnosis, Ryan's condition initially improved, and he managed to live almost like any other child. However, my husband doubted the seriousness of Ryan's illness. "Is Ryan really sick, or are you just trying to fool me?" he questioned one day, watching Ryan play happily. I ignored his baseless accusations. Arguing with him felt pointless. Over time, my husband spent less and less time at home, retreating to his parents' house. Oddly, his absence made things easier for me, as he brought nothing but complaints. My parents stepped in to fill the gap, taking turns helping me care for Ryan. Meanwhile, my husband seemed increasingly uninterested in our son's life. He only returned to the house more frequently after Ryan was hospitalized 2 years ago. "Leave the housework to me," he'd say casually. Then, with a smirk, he'd add, "By the way, why don't you just give me this house?" I ignored his remarks, but it was clear his concern was less about Ryan and more about the property. His plans to move in with his parents loomed over me like a dark cloud. During this time, my father was diagnosed with dementia, and my mother and I were constantly busy managing his care. My husband and in-laws remained oblivious to my father's condition. Even when my father occasionally visited, they seemed unaware. One day, my husband said offhandedly, "Your parents were here earlier. They were just wandering around. Are they not going to help with Ryan?" His relaxed tone infuriated me, but I let it go, too exhausted to explain. As my father's dementia progressed, my uncle began visiting more often. He and my mother frequently held serious discussions. When I asked about it, my mother only gave vague responses. I was worried, but before I could dwell on it, Ryan's condition worsened. Despite preparing myself for this moment, the reality was overwhelming. With my husband unreliable and my father's health declining, I leaned heavily on my mother for support. When I updated my husband about Ryan's deteriorating condition, his response shocked me. "I'm busy right now. Stop calling me. You handle Ryan's situation," he said, dismissively. His lack of parental responsibility pushed me to the brink. I began seriously considering separating from him. Not long after, Ryan passed away. The grief was unbearable. I couldn't bring myself to handle any of the arrangements, but my mother and uncle stepped in, ensuring I could remain by Ryan's side until the very end. Just before the funeral, my uncle began to panic. "Where are Mike and his parents? They can't skip the funeral, can they?" he said, his voice rising in frustration. Seeing his concern, I called my husband. "Where are you?" "It's time to say goodbye to Ryan," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm at a party celebrating my parents' anniversary." "I told you not to call me right now," he replied cheerfully. Hearing his voice, my mother's face turned red with anger. "He's in Hawaii," she exclaimed. My uncle, visibly furious, sprang into action. While I hadn't expected much from my husband, knowing he chose a vacation over our son's funeral filled me with rage. "You knew Ryan was in critical condition and still went on a trip?" I said, my voice shaking. "I pity Ryan for having a father like you." I hung up, tears streaming down my face, as my mother comforted me. "I will never forgive them." "Don't worry, everything will be gone by the time they return from Hawaii," she said cryptically. Though her words confused me, I didn't have the energy to question them. Thanks to my mother and uncle's support, the funeral went smoothly. Afterward, however, I felt lost. My entire life had revolved around Ryan, and now I didn't know how to move forward. "Leave the future to me, Emily. Go back to your parents' house and take it easy," my uncle advised. Taking his advice, I returned home and helped care for my father while taking time off from work. My workplace was understanding and granted me an extended break, which was a relief. Then, one day, my husband called. "Emily, I can't get into the house." "Did you change the locks?" "Changing them without notice is awful," he said, sounding panicked. "I didn't change the locks," I replied calmly. "But I'm planning to end things with you, so don't call me anymore." I hung up, but moments later, he called again, this time more frantic. "My parents' house has been demolished. There's a land for sale sign up." "What's going on?" he shouted. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, cutting him off. "Check with my uncle." When I checked with my uncle, he seemed pleased and invited me to visit my in-laws' family home to see what was happening. Curious and apprehensive, I went as instructed. When I arrived, I found my husband and his parents standing outside, looking utterly stunned. "What's the meaning of this?" my father-in-law demanded. "Our house is gone. Is this because we didn't take you to Hawaii? Did you demolish the house out of spite?" The accusation left me baffled. I could never do something like that. "I was busy grieving my son and arranging his funeral," I retorted, frustrated by the absurdity of her claim. Just then, my uncle and mother arrived. My mother's expression was cold and resolute. "People who didn't even attend their own grandson's funeral have no right to complain," she said, her voice sharp. "You should reflect on your actions." Mike and his parents fell silent, but the silence didn't last. My father-in-law quickly recovered and began ranting. "You can't just demolish the house and sell the land. I'm the owner of that property," he shouted, brandishing a document. His declaration made me pause. Could he be suffering from dementia as well? He proudly showed us a contract bearing my father's signature, claiming that my father had transferred the property to him, but the document looked suspicious, hastily done, and amateurish. To make matters worse, it stated that the property had been given away for free, an impossibility. "This contract isn't valid," I said, my voice steady, "and for the record, my father suffers from dementia and cannot make sound decisions." Mike and his parents insisted the contract was legitimate, claiming they were unaware of my father's condition. "My father is not the owner of this land," my mother interjected firmly. "The property is registered under my name. You must have coerced him into signing this." Her words shocked me, but they clearly unnerved Mike and his family even more. My uncle stepped forward, producing detailed land records and a lease agreement. "This land and building both belong to Emily's mother. You were renting the property from us," he said, his tone stern. "You stopped paying rent months ago, ignored our attempts to meet, and left us no choice but to terminate the lease and put the property up for sale." Mike's parents stared at the documents in stunned silence. "Were we behind on rent?" my father-in-law asked, turning to my mother-in-law. "I thought it was fine since we're related to Emily's uncle," he muttered. Caught off guard, my mother-in-law confessed, "We were planning to trick your father into giving us the land, so we didn't think paying the rent was necessary." Her admission left me furious. They had schemed to exploit my father's condition from the very beginning. As I tried to process this revelation, Mike pulled out another contract, looking regretful. "Is the house we live in also your property? Does this contract mean nothing too?" he asked, his voice tinged with desperation. The document in his hand, much like the first, bore my father's signature. It was clear Mike had created a fake contract, thinking our home belonged to my father as well. "How ridiculous," my mother said, shaking her head. "You tried to deceive us, without even confirming who owned the land. It's absurd." Mike and his parents stood there, trembling with anger and humiliation. Just then, a young woman appeared from behind a nearby building. "When will you pay me back for the travel expenses I covered? And what about the life insurance payout from your son?" she asked. Her appearance left Mike visibly panicked. My uncle smirked. "Even after your son's death, you took your mistress to Hawaii. You truly are shameless," he said. "We've investigated everything." I was stunned but quickly realized that the woman was Mike's mistress. My uncle must have suspected Mike's infidelity and secretly looked into it. Realizing she'd walked into the middle of a volatile situation, the mistress hurriedly fled. "I didn't think you could stoop so low," I said to Mike. "Our son must be appalled from heaven." Unfazed, Mike chased after her, leaving his parents to face the fallout. "How does it feel to have enjoyed yourselves in Hawaii, relying on my son's life insurance money?" I asked coldly. "Unfortunately for you, I'm the beneficiary. You'll have to pay for your extravagant trip on your own." With no comeback, Mike's parents quickly left. After the funeral, I realized what my mother had meant about removing Mike and his family from our lives. I filed for divorce and sought alimony. It turned out Mike had been cheating on me for 2 years and had planned to abandon me after our son's death, thinking he could avoid responsibilities like child support while benefiting from the life insurance payout. Mike had even exploited my father's dementia, coercing him into signing a fraudulent contract while my mother and I were preoccupied with Ryan's illness. However, he hadn't realized the property belonged to my mother, not my father. In the end, Mike and his parents accrued massive debts. Mike had to pay alimony and cover the cost of their Hawaii trip. His mistress left him, and he was left alone, drowning in financial ruin. Back at my family home, I began to recover from the pain of losing my son. My mother and I continued to care for my father, and I found solace in believing that Ryan was watching over us. One day, my father said something unexpected. "Ryan is visiting. He's running around happily," he murmured. Though startled, I chose to believe that my son's spirit was near, encouraging us to live with strength and positivity. For his sake, I vowed to keep moving forward.
I married Raymond because he was the son of my former boss, and 4 years ago, we tied the knot. Although we haven't started a family yet, our life together has generally been happy. Raymond is dedicated to his work and often travels, which can leave me feeling lonely, but he makes up for it by spending quality time with me when he's home. I first met Raymond through my father, and it wasn't long before he suggested I become a stay-at-home wife. This arrangement gave me the time to pursue my own interests. I took up sewing and knitting, befriended our neighbors, and even started a fitness routine. Every winter, I'd gift Raymond handmade scarves and gloves. At first, my attempts were a bit amateurish, but his appreciative comments over the years encouraged me, and I grew to love crafting even more. I'd often dream of the day when we can sew together as a family. I once shared this thought with Raymond, and he smiled warmly, entertaining the idea of joining me in the future. To outsiders, our life may seem privileged, thanks to Raymond's substantial income. But I never skimped on supporting him, managing the household, and making the most of our time together on his days off. I imagined a quiet, content future with my kind husband and hopefully children. However, 3 years ago, everything changed. One evening, while waiting for Raymond to return home from work, I suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed. Raymond rushed back and took me to the hospital where I lay recovering, vulnerable. It was then, to my shock, that Raymond confessed with a smile, "I only married you because you're the boss's daughter." Seeing the scarves and gloves I had made for him discarded and devalued, I was struck with the need to confront him. I wanted him to realize how wrong he was if he thought he could belittle my worth. Despite the hurt, the thought of him eventually recognizing my value brought a small smile to my face. I am Ashley Carroll, and this revelation was a harsh wake-up call about the marriage I had once believed was built on love. When I woke up in the hospital, I overheard snippets of Raymond's conversation with the doctors. It became clear that my condition was serious, likely a lifelong issue, though not immediately life-threatening. Still, the risk of recurrence meant I would need to stay in the hospital for some time. Raymond tried to reassure me during one of his visits, holding my hand gently. "It looks like you'll be here for a while, but don't worry. I'll make time to visit, and we'll get through this together." His presence eased my anxiety, and for a moment I felt that everything might be okay with him by my side. True to his word, Raymond visited almost every day. He'd ask about my day, and noticing the monotony of hospital life, even brought my favorite sewing tools so we could pass the time together. Teaching my clumsy husband to sew became one of the highlights of my days. It helped me momentarily forget the dreariness of the hospital and feel connected to him. This routine continued for about a year, and I knitted a scarf for him as part of our yearly tradition. But after that, his visits grew less frequent. At first, I thought it was just work piling up, so I kept myself busy with sewing, planning to give him a pair of gloves I was making when he visited next. The doctors told me I'd likely be discharged by the end of the year, and I poured all my energy into crafting the gloves, hoping they would bridge the gap created by our time apart. However, when Raymond finally visited after a long absence, his reaction was chilling. He glanced at the gloves I offered and said, "Are you still making these? It's honestly a nuisance now." He then handed me the scarf I had knitted for him the previous year, untouched and pristine, along with divorce papers. Stunned, I could only stare as the reality of the situation sank in. The scarf was as new as the day I had given it to him, and his cold words marked the painful end of a marriage I had once believed was supportive. "Has it been 3 years since your hospitalization?" he remarked casually. "I heard you'll be discharged soon." His indifference was like a sharp blade cutting through everything I had cherished. "I can't keep taking care of you," Raymond said bluntly, pushing the divorce papers toward me. I stared at them, the weight of his words sinking in. His signature was already on the documents, a clear sign of his resolve. I had suspected this might happen, especially after his visits became less frequent, but I had told myself it was just the stress of work, trying to dismiss my fears. The caring Raymond I had known would have kept me informed, no matter how busy he was. As he stood there waiting for my reaction, I managed to ask calmly, "Why do you want a divorce?" It wasn't desperation to hold on to him that prompted the question, but a resigned acceptance. If the gentle Raymond I loved thought divorce was necessary, maybe he was right. Still, part of me was confused. He had promised we would face this challenge together. Raymond's response was harsh and dismissive. "Isn't it obvious? Ever since I married you, all I've had are troubles." I was exhausted, tired of the scarves and gloves I gave him every year. "I only married you because you're the boss's daughter," he sneered, his words cutting deep. "How can I be expected to deal with your illness on top of everything else?" He laughed, and the sound was mocking, dismissing my affectionate gestures as trivial, and my illness as nothing more than an inconvenience. As his words sunk in, I noticed the high-end scarf he was wearing, one I didn't recognize, certainly not one I had made. It was sleek, expensive, far beyond anything I had ever crafted for him. The realization hit me hard. He had never appreciated any of the scarves or gloves I had poured my love into, In fact, he might have found them irritating from the start. Who can even wear a handmade scarf without feeling embarrassed these days? He said, his voice dripping with disdain. Receiving these things is a nuisance now. I felt a wave of sadness mixed with an odd sense of relief. The sadness came from realizing the man I had loved had changed so drastically. The relief, though, was that now I knew the truth. At least the clarity was painful but necessary. Looking at the divorce papers in front of me, I was struck by the contrast. My hospitalization had been a turning point in our relationship, one I hadn't understood until now. After my father retired, Raymond no longer needed to maintain appearances with me. All those visits he made between work commitments, I now saw them for what they were, part of a carefully crafted act to maintain his image. His workplace must have viewed him as a devoted husband, balancing his career and his wife's illness with grace. The sympathy and praise he received from coworkers made it easier for him at work, and he had used my condition to his advantage. When I finally confronted him about it, he admitted without remorse. If I stayed late, I was diligent. If I needed a break, I just mentioned my sick wife. It made things easier. Honestly, I even got a promotion thanks to you. I have to thank your illness for that. The cold grin on his face made my heart sink. The man I had married, the man I thought I knew, was nowhere to be found. Our conversation ended with me handing him the signed divorce papers. He barely looked at them before saying, "Well, if I could be of help, that's good. We probably won't see each other again. Take care." He left without a second thought, showing no emotion. The divorce itself was a quiet affair, but in the silence that followed, I cried. When I was discharged from the hospital, I returned to live with my parents. My father was furious when he heard the full extent of Raymond's behavior. "I never thought he would be that kind of guy," he muttered in disbelief. But by then, I had found a sense of detachment and calm. I reassured him, telling him I just wanted to move forward. After sorting through my things at the house I had shared with Raymond, my parents supported me, encouraging me to do whatever made me happy. I decided to live with them for the time being, but I wanted one last visit to the house. I needed to collect the rest of my things and close that chapter of my life once and for all. However, when I arrived, I was met with an unsettling surprise. The front door lock was broken. My parents and I rang the doorbell, only to be greeted by a stranger. I asked who he was, and he informed me that he had purchased the house months ago and was now living there with his family. My parents were furious, but I chose not to escalate things. Instead, I walked away quietly, my mind racing with questions. I called Raymond, desperate for answers. He answered casually, "Yeah, I sold it while you were in the hospital. I'm keeping the money as compensation. It was my house to begin with, so you have no complaints, right?" His indifferent tone left me stunned, a cold sense of disbelief washing over me. I wished he had told me sooner. From what the new owner shared, it seemed the house had been sold quite a while ago, probably about a year, when my husband's visits had stopped. Although our divorce had been finalized with the signed papers, we had agreed to discuss asset division and compensation after my discharge, planning to meet the following week. Yet my husband had already taken matters into his own hands. His lack of awareness bothered me more than I expected. Over the phone, I said, "You don't understand anything, do you?" Confused, he asked, "Huh? What do you mean?" I replied, "I'll explain next week," and hung up, leaving him with more questions than answers. I turned to my parents, who were clearly worried, and asked my father for a favor. Despite the short notice, he quickly prepared the necessary documents for our upcoming meeting. "I've got it already," he said with determination. "There's not much time, but we'll manage." His resolve was partly fueled by guilt. He had introduced me to my husband, and his anger toward him for what had transpired. We sat together at my family's home, my parents and I positioned in a line, facing my husband, who sat alone on the other side. Despite the tension, he appeared unconcerned, even smirking slightly as the conversation unfolded. He claimed, "I'm the victim here, but I don't intend to demand too much. The proceeds from the sale of the house will suffice." His words were laced with arrogance, as though he were being generous, but his smugness was clear. My father's face reddened with anger, and I placed a hand on him, urging him to stay calm. We had the upper hand in this situation, and I knew it. "There's something important we need to discuss first," I began. At that moment, my father presented a document. "The land on which the house stands is owned by me," my father said firmly. I turned to my husband. "The house was in your name," I acknowledged, but the land belongs to my father." The revelation hit him hard. Though he tried to mask his surprise with a dismissive tone, his eyes betrayed him. "So what? The house was mine. No one has the right to complain. You think you can retaliate with that?" I remained calm. "Yes, the house was in your name, and you probably checked that there were no legal issues with selling it. But let me explain the broader implications." I paused, letting the weight of the words settle in. "You're right, there was no problem with you selling the house. But think about the family who bought it. They own the house, but not the land. If my father decides to, he could demand rent from them, which would cause serious issues." I allowed that to sink in for a moment before continuing. "Of course, neither my father nor I intend to demand rent or evict them. We're not here to cause trouble. However, we can't just give up the rights to the land either. What we propose is selling the land directly to the family, ensuring they have full ownership. That way, they won't face any future legal disputes, and neither will you." The new owners, understandably, were upset when they learned of the situation. They realized that any complications stemming from this oversight would fall on the seller, my husband. They were ready to take legal action if necessary, which visibly unsettled him. I watched as his face turned pale, the realization of the mess he had created settling in. I could see that Raymond finally understood the severity of his mistake. His voice trembled as he asked, "What should I do?" I smiled faintly, keeping my composure. "The best course of action would be for the family to purchase the land from us. That way, they can fully own both the house and the land, resolving any legal ambiguities." I continued, "Of course, they weren't aware they needed to buy the land when they bought the house, and they will likely seek compensation for this unexpected expense. Given the prime location of the land, it could cost more than the house itself." This placed Raymond in a difficult position, but it was the consequence of his own decisions. By selling the house without considering the land ownership, he had created a complex issue, not only for himself but also for the unsuspecting family who had purchased the house. Now, he faced the potential financial fallout from his actions, which could include compensating the new owners for the cost of the land to fix the situation. Raymond's options were limited and financially perilous. If he gave up all his assets, he'd be left with nothing. Alternatively, he could attempt to buy back the house and pay for the land, along with a relocation fee for the family currently living there. This would return the property to his possession, but given the significant costs, especially the relocation fee, it was unlikely he'd make any profit. But beyond the financial mess, there was the issue of emotional damage. I looked at him steadily and said, "Raymond, your actions have caused me significant mental distress. I plan to seek compensation for that. Keep that in mind." Throughout our marriage, Raymond had used me as a stepping stone for his career. Now that I could see his manipulations clearly, I was disgusted by what I had once mistaken for love. I intended to file for damages over the emotional toll his actions had taken, even though proving emotional distress in court could be challenging. Raising the issue, however, was important, especially given his current predicament. As Raymond processed this, my father added fuel to the fire. Despite being retired and no longer working at the company, he had maintained strong connections. "I've been in touch with my old colleagues," he said with a note of satisfaction. "They've been quite vocal about their disapproval of how you've treated my daughter." My father's words drove home the fact that Raymond's reputation at work was deteriorating. His unethical behavior was no longer a secret. As we sat across from him, preparing to discuss the terms of property division and compensation, my demeanor was calm but firm. "Now that you understand the situation, we need to settle the division of property and compensation," I stated, clasping my hands and offering a smile. It was a smile very different from those I had given him during our marriage. This one came from someone who had reclaimed their power. Raymond, visibly shaken by the weight of his financial and social collapse, could only manage a forced laugh, his eyes brimming with tears. The negotiations that followed were decidedly in my favor. Resigned to this fate, Raymond agreed to the terms, which included paying me alimony. This meeting wasn't just about dividing property, it was a moment of realization for Raymond, a stark reminder of the consequences of his actions. It marked the end of his manipulative tactics. With every decision made, I felt a sense of closure, of empowerment, finally turning the page on a challenging chapter of my life. We agreed that Raymond would buy the land where our house was located, ensuring the family who had purchased our home could live there without further legal complications. We explained the situation to them, and thankfully, they were understanding and appreciative of our efforts to resolve the matter. In the end, everyone found a resolution that worked for them, except for Raymond. The consequences of his actions began to unfold quickly. The rumors my father had unintentionally set in motion took their toll. His colleagues' perceptions of him shifted dramatically, and his once promising promotion was indefinitely postponed due to concerns over his integrity. These rumors continued to erode his professional standing, ultimately leading to his resignation. While I could attribute his downfall to karma, it was a stark reminder that gains made through exploitation are fragile and can easily crumble. As for me, I returned to living with my parents and started running a sewing class from their home. It wasn't a thriving business, but it was fulfilling. My classes, attended by neighborhood wives and their children, provided a modest income. Though I had once dreamed of teaching my children to sew, life had taken a different turn. Now, I found joy in sharing my skills and passion for sewing with others in the community. This new chapter of my life wasn't just about making ends meet. It was about finding contentment and building a sense of community by sharing what I loved. It confirmed that happiness often comes from the most unexpected places. I married Raymond because he was the son of my former boss, and 4 years ago, we tied the knot. Although we haven't started a family yet, our life together has generally been happy. Raymond is dedicated to his work and often travels, which can leave me feeling lonely, but he makes up for it by spending quality time with me when he's home. I first met Raymond through my father, and it wasn't long before he suggested I become a stay-at-home wife. This arrangement gave me the time to pursue my own interests. I took up sewing and knitting, befriended our neighbors, and even started a fitness routine. Every winter, I'd gift Raymond handmade scarves and gloves. At first, my attempts were a bit amateurish, but his appreciative comments over the years encouraged me, and I grew to love crafting even more. I'd often dream of the day when we can sew together as a family. I once shared this thought with Raymond, and he smiled warmly, entertaining the idea of joining me in the future. To outsiders, our life may seem privileged, thanks to Raymond's substantial income. But I never skimped on supporting him, managing the household, and making the most of our time together on his days off. I imagined a quiet, content future with my kind husband and hopefully children. However, 3 years ago, everything changed. One evening, while waiting for Raymond to return home from work, I suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed. Raymond rushed back and took me to the hospital where I lay recovering, vulnerable. It was then, to my shock, that Raymond confessed with a smile, "I only married you because you're the boss's daughter." Seeing the scarves and gloves I had made for him discarded and devalued, I was struck with the need to confront him. I wanted him to realize how wrong he was if he thought he could belittle my worth. Despite the hurt, the thought of him eventually recognizing my value brought a small smile to my face. I am Ashley Carroll, and this revelation was a harsh wake-up call about the marriage I had once believed was built on love. When I woke up in the hospital, I overheard snippets of Raymond's conversation with the doctors. It became clear that my condition was serious, likely a lifelong issue, though not immediately life-threatening. Still, the risk of recurrence meant I would need to stay in the hospital for some time. Raymond tried to reassure me during one of his visits, holding my hand gently. "It looks like you'll be here for a while. But don't worry, I'll make time to visit, and we'll get through this together." His presence eased my anxiety, and for a moment I felt that everything might be okay with him by my side. True to his word, Raymond visited almost every day. He asked about my day, and noticing the monotony of hospital life, even brought my favorite sewing tools so we could pass the time together. Teaching my clumsy husband to sew became one of the highlights of my days. It helped me momentarily forget the dreariness of the hospital and feel connected to him. This routine continued for about a year, and I knitted a scarf for him as part of our yearly tradition. But after that, his visits grew less frequent. At first, I thought it was just work piling up, so I kept myself busy with sewing, planning to give him a pair of gloves I was making when he visited next. The doctors told me I'd likely be discharged by the end of the year, and I poured all my energy into crafting the gloves, hoping they would bridge the gap created by our time apart. However, when Raymond finally visited after a long absence, his reaction was chilling. He glanced at the gloves I offered and said, "Are you still making these? It's honestly a nuisance now." He then handed me the scarf I had knitted for him the previous year, untouched and pristine, along with divorce papers. Stunned, I could only stare as the reality of the situation sank in. The scarf was as new as the day I had given it to him, and his cold words marked the painful end of a marriage I had once believed was supportive. "Has it been 3 years since your hospitalization?" he remarked casually. "I heard you'll be discharged soon." His indifference was like a sharp blade cutting through everything I had cherished. "I can't keep taking care of you," Raymond said bluntly, pushing the divorce papers toward me. I stared at them, the weight of his words sinking in. His signature was already on the documents, a clear sign of his resolve. I had suspected this might happen, especially after his visits became less frequent, but I had told myself it was just the stress of work, trying to dismiss my fears. The caring Raymond I had known would have kept me informed, no matter how busy he was. As he stood there waiting for my reaction, I managed to ask calmly, "Why do you want a divorce?" It wasn't desperation to hold on to him that prompted the question, but a resigned acceptance. If the gentle Raymond I loved thought divorce was necessary, maybe he was right. Still, part of me was confused. He had promised we would face this challenge together. Raymond's response was harsh and dismissive. "Isn't it obvious? Ever since I married you, all I've had are troubles." I was exhausted, tired of the scarves and gloves I gave him every year. "I only married you because you're the boss's daughter," he sneered, his words cutting deep. "How can I be expected to deal with your illness on top of everything else?" He laughed, and the sound was mocking, dismissing my affectionate gestures as trivial, and my illness as nothing more than an inconvenience. As his words sunk in, I noticed the high-end scarf he was wearing, one I didn't recognize, certainly not one I had made. It was sleek, expensive, far beyond anything I had ever crafted for him. The realization hit me hard. He had never appreciated any of the scarves or gloves I had poured my love into. In fact, he might have found them irritating from the start. "Who can even wear a handmade scarf without feeling embarrassed these days?" he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Receiving these things is a nuisance now." I felt a wave of sadness mixed with an odd sense of relief. The sadness came from realizing the man I had loved had changed so drastically. The relief, though, was that now I knew the truth. At least the clarity was painful but necessary. Looking at the divorce papers in front of me, I was struck by the contrast. My hospitalization had been a turning point in our relationship, one I hadn't understood until now. After my father retired, Raymond no longer needed to maintain appearances with me. All those visits he made between work commitments, I now saw them for what they were, part of a carefully crafted act to maintain his image. His workplace must have viewed him as a devoted husband, balancing his career and his wife's illness with grace. The sympathy and praise he received from coworkers made it easier for him at work, and he had used my condition to his advantage. When I finally confronted him about it, he admitted without remorse. If I stayed late, I was diligent. If I needed a break, I just mentioned my sick wife. It made things easier. Honestly, I even got a promotion thanks to you. I have to thank your illness for that. The cold grin on his face made my heart sink. The man I had married, the man I thought I knew, was nowhere to be found. Our conversation ended with me handing him the signed divorce papers. He barely looked at them before saying, "Well, if I could be of help, that's good. We probably won't see each other again. Take care." He left without a second thought, showing no emotion. The divorce itself was a quiet affair, but in the silence that followed, I cried. When I was discharged from the hospital, I returned to live with my parents. My father was furious when he heard the full extent of Raymond's behavior. "I never thought he would be that kind of guy," he muttered in disbelief. But by then, I had found a sense of detachment and calm. I reassured him, telling him I just wanted to move forward. After sorting through my things at the house I had shared with Raymond, my parents supported me, encouraging me to do whatever made me happy. I decided to live with them for the time being, but I wanted one last visit to the house. I needed to collect the rest of my things and close that chapter of my life once and for all. However, when I arrived, I was met with an unsettling surprise. The front door lock was broken. My parents and I rang the doorbell, only to be greeted by a stranger. I asked who he was, and he informed me that he had purchased the house months ago and was now living there with his family. My parents were furious, but I chose not to escalate things. Instead, I walked away quietly, my mind racing with questions. I called Raymond, desperate for answers. He answered casually, "Yeah, I sold it while you were in the hospital. I'm keeping the money as compensation. It was my house to begin with, so you have no complaints, right?" His indifferent tone left me stunned, a cold sense of disbelief washing over me. I wished he had told me sooner. From what the new owner shared, it seemed the house had been sold quite a while ago, probably about a year when my husband's visits had stopped. Although our divorce had been finalized with the signed papers, we had agreed to discuss asset division and compensation after my discharge, planning to meet the following week. Yet my husband had already taken matters into his own hands. His lack of awareness bothered me more than I expected. Over the phone, I said, "You don't understand anything, do you?" Confused, he asked, "Huh? What do you mean?" I replied, "I'll explain next week," and hung up, leaving him with more questions than answers. I turned to my parents, who were clearly worried, and asked my father for a favor. Despite the short notice, he quickly prepared the necessary documents for our upcoming meeting. "I've got it already," he said with determination. "There's not much time, but we'll manage." His resolve was partly fueled by guilt. He had introduced me to my husband, and his anger toward him for what had transpired. We sat together at my family's home, my parents and I positioned in a line, facing my husband, who sat alone on the other side. Despite the tension, he appeared unconcerned, even smirking slightly as the conversation unfolded. He claimed, "I'm the victim here, but I don't intend to demand too much. The proceeds from the sale of the house will suffice." His words were laced with arrogance, as though he were being generous, but his smugness was clear. My father's face reddened with anger, and I placed a hand on him, urging him to stay calm. We had the upper hand in this situation, and I knew it. "There's something important we need to discuss first," I began. At that moment, my father presented a document. "The land on which the house stands is owned by me," my father said firmly. I turned to my husband. "The house was in your name," I acknowledged, "but the land belongs to my father." The revelation hit him hard. Though he tried to mask his surprise with a dismissive tone, his eyes betrayed him. "So what? The house was mine. No one has the right to complain. You think you can retaliate with that?" I remained calm. "Yes, the house was in your name, and you probably checked that there were no legal issues with selling it. But let me explain the broader implications." I paused, letting the weight of the words settle in. "You're right, there was no problem with you selling the house. But think about the family who bought it. They own the house, but not the land. If my father decides to, he could demand rent from them, which would cause serious issues." I allowed that to sink in for a moment before continuing. "Of course, neither my father nor I intend to demand rent or evict them. We're not here to cause trouble. However, we can't just give up the rights to the land either. What we propose is selling the land directly to the family, ensuring they have full ownership. That way, they won't face any future legal disputes, and neither will you." The new owners, understandably, were upset when they learned of the situation. They realized that any complications stemming from this oversight would fall on the seller, my husband. They were ready to take legal action if necessary, which visibly unsettled him. I watched as his face turned pale, the realization of the mess he had created settling in. I could see that Raymond finally understood the severity of his mistake. His voice trembled as he asked, "What should I do?" I smiled faintly, keeping my composure. "The best course of action would be for the family to purchase the land from us. That way, they can fully own both the house and the land, resolving any legal ambiguities." I continued, "Of course, they weren't aware they needed to buy the land when they bought the house, and they will likely seek compensation for this unexpected expense. Given the prime location of the land, it could cost more than the house itself." This placed Raymond in a difficult position, but it was the consequence of his own decisions. By selling the house without considering the land ownership, he had created a complex issue, not only for himself but also for the unsuspecting family who had purchased the house. Now, he faced the potential financial fallout from his actions, which could include compensating the new owners for the costs of the land to fix the situation. Raymond's options were limited and financially perilous. If he gave up all his assets, he'd be left with nothing. Alternatively, he could attempt to buy back the house and pay for the land, along with a relocation fee for the family currently living there. This would return the property to his possession, but given the significant costs, especially the relocation fee, it was unlikely he'd make any profit. But beyond the financial mess, there was the issue of emotional damage. I looked at him steadily and said, "Raymond, your actions have caused me significant mental distress. I plan to seek compensation for that. Keep that in mind." Throughout our marriage, Raymond had used me as a stepping stone for his career. Now that I could see his manipulations clearly, I was disgusted by what I had once mistaken for love. I intended to file for damages over the emotional toll his actions had taken, even though proving emotional distress in court could be challenging. Raising the issue, however, was important, especially given his current predicament. As Raymond processed this, my father added fuel to the fire. Despite being retired and no longer working at the company, he had maintained strong connections. "I've been in touch with my old colleagues," he said with a note of satisfaction. "They've been quite vocal about their disapproval of how you've treated my daughter." My father's words drove home the fact that Raymond's reputation at work was deteriorating. His unethical behavior was no longer a secret. As we sat across from him, preparing to discuss the terms of property division and compensation, my demeanor was calm but firm. "Now that you understand the situation, we need to settle the division of property and compensation," I stated, clasping my hands and offering a smile. It was a smile very different from those I had given him during our marriage. This one came from someone who had reclaimed their power. Raymond, visibly shaken by the weight of his financial and social collapse, could only manage a forced laugh, his eyes brimming with tears. The negotiations that followed were decidedly in my favor. Resigned to this fate, Raymond agreed to the terms, which included paying me alimony. This meeting wasn't just about dividing property. It was a moment of realization for Raymond, a stark reminder of the consequences of his actions. It marked the end of his manipulative tactics. With every decision made, I felt a sense of closure, of empowerment, finally turning the page on a challenging chapter of my life. We agreed that Raymond would buy the land where our house was located, ensuring the family who had purchased our home could live there without further legal complications. We explained the situation to them, and thankfully, they were understanding and appreciative of our efforts to resolve the matter. In the end, everyone found a resolution that worked for them, except for Raymond. The consequences of his actions began to unfold quickly. The rumors my father had unintentionally set in motion took their toll. His colleagues' perceptions of him shifted dramatically, and his once promising promotion was indefinitely postponed due to concerns over his integrity. These rumors continued to erode his professional standing, ultimately leading to his resignation. While I could attribute his downfall to karma, it was a stark reminder that gains made through exploitation are fragile and can easily crumble. As for me, I returned to living with my parents and started running a sewing class from their home. It wasn't a thriving business, but it was fulfilling. My classes, attended by neighborhood wives and their children, provided a modest income. Though I had once dreamed of teaching my children to sew, life had taken a different turn. Now, I found joy in sharing my skills and passion for sewing with others in the community. This new chapter of my life wasn't just about making ends meet. It was about finding contentment and building a sense of community by sharing what I loved. It confirmed that happiness often comes from the most unexpected places. Ignoring the trembling of my own body, I pulled out my mobile phone from my pocket as Mia approached me. I tried to reassure her, saying, "It's going to be okay." But Carly responded, "Mom, we don't need to call an ambulance." The shock of her words hit me like a wave. My name is Katie. I'm 34 years old and work part-time at a call center in the mornings. I met my husband Steve at a high school reunion. By chance, we reconnected, and as we talked, we realized how compatible we were. We began dating soon after, got married 3 years later, and now have a daughter named Mia, who is in the first grade. Since Mia's birth, our living expenses have increased. Driven by a strong desire to support our family, Steve has taken on long overtime hours. Even when he comes home late, I'm deeply grateful for his dedication to us. His work as a pharmacist often means he's home early when I'm sick. He knows all about the medicine and would say, "Tell me where it hurts, and I'll prepare the right remedy for you." He would even give me massages. Steve's support has been a constant. When I was down with a cold, Maya would look worried and say, "Mom, I hope you get better soon." Wanting to recover for her sake, I focused on my treatment. Seeing my pained expression, Maya once asked Steve, "Daddy, can you give Mom the usual magic medicine?" Steve understood and handed me some herbal and cold medicines. At home, we called these magic medicine. Even Mia, who usually disliked medicine, would muster the courage to take it. I'd often felt better the next day, thanks to this magic. "I'll take the magic medicine and get better for Mia," I said, taking the bitter pill. By the next morning, I felt entirely rejuvenated. "Thanks to Mia, I'm all better now," I told her. No, it's thanks to the magic medicine," she replied with a bright smile before heading off to school. "You seem to be feeling much better. I'll head to work now." "Rest up today," Steve said before leaving. Feeling grateful for their concern, I decided to make a lavish dinner that night, hoping it might be mistaken for a special occasion. I began preparing the ingredients. When Maya returned from school around 3, she was ecstatic. "My friends and I were talking about the delicious smell in the air. And it's your cooking, Mom. I can't wait for dinner," she said excitedly and quickly finished her homework. Seeing her happy face made me feel that the extra effort I put into cooking was worth it. As evening approached, I set the table, thinking Steve would be home soon. Maya helped by lining up the drinking glasses. Just then, my cell phone rang. It was Steve. His voice sounded rushed. "I was planning to come home early today, but a coworker has a serious personal issue. I want to treat him to dinner and listen to him, so don't worry about dinner for me tonight." "I'm really sorry," he said quickly before hanging up. I was left wondering if it was truly that urgent. I called out to Mia. "Daddy says he has an important talk with someone from work tonight, so he won't be able to eat dinner with us. It's a pity, but let's just enjoy our meal, just the two of us." Upon hearing this, Maya's face fell. "Daddy's not eating even though you worked so hard to make dinner," she said, trying to hide her sadness. Seeing her disappointment made me genuinely upset, but her understanding helped me cope. "As long as you eat it, Mia, I'm happy. Thank you for being so understanding," I said. "Okay, let's enjoy dinner together then," Maya agreed. We had our meal, washed the dishes, and savored dessert. We spent the evening waiting for Steve, but no matter how long we waited, he didn't come home. I wondered where Daddy was. I had hoped he'd be back for dessert. "I'm worried too, but it's getting late," I said to Mia. "Let's head to bed." Despite our concerns, Steve didn't return that night, and we went to bed. He didn't come home until around 5 o'clock the next morning. I heard the front door open as I was preparing breakfast and packing lunch boxes. I went to the entrance to find Steve there, looking tired. "I'm so sorry," he said immediately. "I missed the last train and had to wait for the first one in the morning. I'm really sorry for not coming home." Seeing how significant the issue with his coworker was, I didn't feel like blaming him. "Why don't you take a shower first? By the time you're out, breakfast should be ready," I suggested. "Thanks, I'll do that," Steve replied. A little later, Maya woke up and the three of us had breakfast together. Maya eagerly told Steve about the meal from last night. "Daddy, why didn't you come home? Mom made a really delicious dinner." "I'm sorry, Mia," Steve said. "I promise I'll be home early today." With that promise, we went our separate ways for the day. After work, I went to the grocery store. I had a simple menu in mind, planning to make an omelette, Maya's favorite. While shopping, I ran into the mother of one of Maya's friends. "Oh, Maya's mom. It's been a while. How have you been?" she asked. "I've been fine, though I've been feeling a bit under the weather lately. Maybe it's my age," I replied. As we chatted, she made an unexpected suggestion. "How about inviting Maya over to our house for a sleepover? Don't you think you could use a little time to relax too? Naomi would be thrilled if Maya stayed over." "That sounds wonderful. I'm sure Maya would love it. Thank you for the offer," I said. We arranged a date for the sleepover and went our separate ways. When Maya came home in the evening, I shared the news with her. "I spoke with Naomi's mom today, and she invited you for a sleepover." Maya's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? Can we have a sleepover?" "Yes, but remember to behave and don't get too excited. They want you to stay over on Saturday." Maya's face lit up with a broad smile, and she immediately began preparing her things. I was relieved that Naomi's mom had suggested the sleepover, and I felt deeply grateful for her kindness. That evening, as promised, Steve came home early. Maya enthusiastically greeted him. "Guess what, Dad? I'm going to have a sleepover at Naomi's house this Saturday." Maya shared the news, bouncing around with excitement. I explained to Steve that Naomi's mom had made the offer out of consideration for us. Steve responded, "Then maybe I'll head out on Saturday. You should take advantage of the free time, enjoy lunch or go shopping, whatever you like. I'll pick Mia up on Sunday." "Really? Thank you so much," I said, grateful for his thoughtful suggestion. After dinner, Steve pulled an envelope from his bag. "What's that?" Maya asked curiously. Steve smiled and said, "Curious, aren't you?" He opened the envelope to reveal a small bag and handed it to me. "This is for you. I've noticed you haven't been feeling well lately, so I found some special food that's said to have magical properties." Maya's face lit up. Mom gets sick a lot, but with this she'll get better, right? I felt a mix of slight guilt and deep gratitude. "Thank you, Steve. You went out of your way to buy this. It must have been expensive." "Your well-being is the top priority," Steve said with a gentle smile. "If you take them daily, it will definitely help." He then apologized. "I have to admit, from tomorrow until Friday, work's going to be very busy, and I might come home late." Steve's earnest apology made Maya look a bit upset. I was disappointed as well, but I understood he was doing his best for us. I held back my feelings and comforted Mia. "Dad is working hard for us. How about we go to the amusement park next time he has a day off?" Maya seemed to understand, and Steve gave me a regretful nod. As it was time for bed, I opened the bag Steve had given me. Inside was something I had never seen before, dark-colored and dried. When I tasted it, it had a fruity flavor and was quite delicious. However, later that night, around 2 a.m., I woke up feeling strange. I had a severe headache and an upset stomach. I rushed to the bathroom, realizing that neither Maya nor Steve seemed affected. I pondered what else I had eaten and remembered the special food from Steve. I hadn't asked about the specific benefits or details of the special food Steve gave me, but I suspected it might be the cause of my discomfort. Despite feeling uneasy, I managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, I found that Steve had already left the house. There was a note on the table that read, "Thanks for the lunch. If there are any problems, contact me. See you soon." I debated whether to tell him that the food wasn't quite right for me. It seemed impolite not to mention it, but I didn't want to disturb him at work. I decided to send him a text later. Soon after, Maya woke up. At breakfast, she excitedly talked about her upcoming sleepover at Naomi's house. After we got ready, we both left the house. "Will we see Dad until Friday?" Maya asked. "Probably not," I replied. "He might come home after you're asleep and leave before you wake up. If you want to talk to him about something, maybe you could write him a letter." "Maybe I will," Maya said as we went our separate ways to school and work. When I arrived at the office and started preparing for the day, I received a message from Steve. "Remember to eat it daily. Consistency is key." I replied, asking about the effects of the food. Steve's response came later in the evening. "It's packed with nutrients. Don't worry, it's not harmful." Maybe my frail body overreacted. Though he assured me it was safe, the memory of last night's symptoms made me uneasy about eating it again. Even though it seemed wasteful, I decided not to eat the food Steve had given me. Instead, I resolved to find supplements and healthy foods that suited me better. This morning, on a whim, I used the special food to prepare Steve's lunch. I hoped it would help him stay healthy during his busy days and also avoid wasting the ingredients. Days passed, and there was no change in Steve's condition. He continued his work as usual, which relieved me. It seemed I was the only one who had a reaction. Finally, Saturday arrived. Maya left for her sleepover at Naomi's, picked up by Naomi's mom. Steve went out early for a golf day at a distant resort. I spent a relaxing day shopping, dining out, and unwinding. Every now and then, I received emails from Naomi's mom with updates on Mia. The photos showed Mia and Naomi happily making sweets together. Then came Sunday. I received a message from Steve saying he'd be coming back after watching a new movie with Mia. While I felt a twinge of guilt, I was grateful for Steve's thoughtfulness. They returned home before it got dark, but Maya's usual smile was absent. She seemed subdued, possibly sad to say goodbye to Naomi. Steve remarked, "I think she was having a hard time parting with Naomi." Listening to him, I was reminded of my own childhood. Saying goodbye to friends after special times was always tough. Maya must have really enjoyed her time with Naomi. "How about we invite Naomi over next time?" I suggested to Mia, hoping to lift her spirits and give Naomi's mom a chance to spend more time with her. Maya gave an awkward smile and nodded. As I started preparing dinner with Maya's help, Steve mentioned he was going to take a shower and left the living room. The moment he was out of sight, Maya gently tugged on my sleeve. Just as I was about to ask her what was wrong, a loud crash came from the bathroom. I rushed over and the sight that met me made me scream. Steve was lying on the floor, unmoving. I grabbed my cell phone, trying to steady my trembling hands. With Mia by my side, I attempted to reassure her. "Everything will be okay," I said, but she interrupted with, "Mom, you don't need to call an ambulance." I was shocked by her words and asked, "Why not?" "Because Dad did something bad and he's being punished," she replied. I struggled to understand her meaning, but my priority was to help Steve. I told Mia we'd talk later and immediately call for an ambulance. Thankfully, the quick response meant Steve's life was not in danger, though he had not regained consciousness. Once it was decided that Steve would need to be hospitalized, I made plans to head to the hospital. I thanked everyone who had helped and then left the hospital with Mia. Once we were home, I finally had a chance to ask her about her earlier comments. "Maya, can you explain what you meant earlier?" I asked. She nodded and began, "Naomi told me something during our sleepover." Maya continued, explaining that recently, around bedtime, Naomi had noticed Steve walking in front of their house. Maya seemed puzzled and said, "But isn't that around 9:00 p.m.? I thought Dad worked a bit later, so it must have been someone else." Naomi had insisted it was definitely Steve. They decided to keep an eye out that night. When bedtime came, Naomi left the room to use the bathroom, and Maya saw someone passing by their house. To her shock, it was indeed Steve, holding hands with an unfamiliar woman and walking together affectionately. Seeing her dad with someone who wasn't me was a huge shock for Mia. She went to sleep without telling Naomi, pretending she hadn't seen anything. The next day, when Steve came to pick up Mia, she couldn't muster a smile, still preoccupied by the previous night's events. Later, when Steve took her to a movie, he mentioned, "Oops, I accidentally bought a ticket for Mom too." Maya forced a smile, trying to ignore his comment. Throughout the movie, Steve seemed distant, giving only half-hearted replies to Mia's attempts to engage him. She overheard him whispering to the strange woman, "Hey, my daughter is right next to us." The woman replied, "It's fine. Eventually she'll be my daughter too. Aren't you happy, Mia? I'm prettier than your mom." Maya was taken aback by the unexpected comment. Steve seemed to signal the woman to stop but continued to enjoy the movie with her. Maya realized that Steve's excuse about mistakenly buying a ticket for me was a lie. It was impossible to pretend everything was fine. Avoiding Steve's gaze, Maya finished her story, and my expression shifted dramatically. I couldn't believe Steve was doing this behind my back. His behavior had seemed normal, and though Maya's story was hard to believe, I knew she wasn't one to lie. In the midst of the confusion, I heard a notification from Steve's phone, which I had accidentally brought with me in the ambulance. Checking the phone, I saw several messages, but one stood out. It detailed how much fun the movie was and how their plan to drive me out was progressing smoothly. My heart sank as I realized Maya's story was true. Steve appeared to be plotting to force me out of our home. Reflecting on Steve's recent behavior, I realized there had been no clear signs that his plan was already in motion. It seemed he had yet to put his scheme into action. Just then, I received a call from the hospital with an update on Steve's condition. Rushing back to the hospital, the doctor explained, "We believe an excessive intake of a particular food caused Steve's symptoms. While he is generally healthy, consuming too much of this substance led to these headaches, stomach issues, and dizziness. Do you know anything about this?" Understanding dawned on me. It seemed that Steve and the woman had been deliberately trying to harm my health by giving me harmful ingredients in large amounts. Their frequent late nights and claims of working overtime were likely lies to cover up their meetings. My anger grew as I pieced together Steve's malicious actions. A nurse soon informed me that Steve had regained consciousness and was now able to talk. With my emotions steadied, I prepared to confront the truth. I decided to visit Steve's hospital room. Thankfully, my parents' home was only a 20-minute drive from the hospital, so I left Mia with my mother, saying, "Mommy needs to have an important talk with Daddy. Stay with Grandma while we talk, okay?" Maya, though silent, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Her young face betrayed a mix of concern and maturity, which only deepened my feelings of guilt for involving her in this mess. My anger towards Steve for his betrayal, especially in front of our daughter, was overwhelming. Standing outside Steve's hospital room, I tried to steady my nerves. Just before knocking, I overheard voices through the door and saw an unfamiliar woman through the window. Curiosity got the better of me, and I cracked the door open slightly to listen. Even after you collapse, your wife hasn't shown up. How cold-hearted can she be? One voice sneered. You should just get a divorce, the woman responded. She's still around, isn't she? Stubborn. The conversation confirmed my worst fears. This woman was clearly involved in Steve's scheme. Unable to contain my anger, I knocked loudly and swung the door open. Steve and the woman turned to look at me, startled. Did I interrupt something? I asked, my voice cold. Their faces went pale. The woman, who had been seated, quickly stood up, attempting to hide her shock. Oh, you're his wife, right? I'm just a colleague from his office. I'll be on my way now, she said, trying to leave. I wasn't about to let her go that easily. I blocked her path. Since you've taken the time to visit, why don't you stay a while? I said with a forced smile. Her uncertainty was palpable. Yeah, why not stay a bit longer? I pressed, the tension in the room thickening. Steve tried to play it cool but failed to hide his discomfort. My voice trembled slightly, betraying the intensity of the situation. The woman flinched at the smallest movement from me. I decided not to drag this out and got straight to the point. You're having an affair with her, aren't you? Caught off guard, Steve responded quickly. What are you talking about? That's not true. She's just a coworker. Really? I retorted. So, you're watching movies with just a coworker, bringing our daughter along, and joking about her becoming your future wife? Neither Steve nor the woman could respond. They looked down in shame. I pressed on. And that food I got from you. I tried it, even though I suspected it might not be right for me. I ended up using it in your lunch. Steve's calm demeanor shattered. He shouted, Why would you do that? Is that why I passed out? Really? I had no idea it was that dangerous, I replied. You said it was good and healthy. I just wanted to give you a boost. Well, it looks like your plan to hospitalize me backfired, I said with a smirk. I bet you didn't expect it to be in your own lunch, did you? Steve was left speechless, his expression a mix of devastation and disbelief. I turned to the woman and said, So, you're the one who seduced a married man, aren't you? Don't think you're blameless in this situation. Expect some kind of revenge from me. I glared at her and she faltered, stepping back. Why should I? Steve approached me first. He said he needed comfort. I'm a victim too, she stammered. Oh really? I responded sharply. So, you're saying he initiated everything? In that case, can we see your messages with him? If you're truly the victim, there wouldn't be any explicit advances from you, right? The woman hesitated, clearly realizing her scheme had unraveled. Her tone shifted abruptly. I'm sorry. I apologize. Please just forgive me this once. No matter how much you apologize, I can't forgive this, I said, my voice steady. I turned and walked out, leaving the two of them pale and tearful. I returned to my parents' house where Maya was waiting. Welcome back. Maya's been such a good girl. Thank you for taking care of her on such short notice, my mother said warmly. I took a deep breath and explained, I'm planning on divorcing Steve. Is it alright if we stay here for a while? My mother's initial shock quickly turned into support as I recounted the whole story. That's what happened then. Stay here. I'll help you get your things. Don't worry, she said firmly, offering both me and Maya her unwavering support. Her kindness touched me deeply, and tears welled up in my eyes. I carefully explained the situation to Mia. Daddy was close with someone else besides Mommy, and I don't like him anymore. I'd rather stay here with Grandma. Despite her young age, Maya seemed to grasp the seriousness of Steve's actions. Thank you, Mia. From now on, I'll protect your smile for both of us, I promised her. Later, when my father returned from work, we went to the house we had shared with Steve. We quickly packed up our things and left. After the dramatic events, Steve was discharged from the hospital. When he came home, my father and I went to discuss matters with him. As soon as Steve saw me, he immediately apologized. I'm truly sorry. I've realized that Katie and Maya are my treasures. I'll completely cut ties with that woman. Please forgive me. Despite his belated remorse, my heart had hardened. I can't imagine getting back with someone who planned to betray me. Please sign the affidavit of the defendant from the court, I said, my irritation evident. My father, standing behind me, added, Listen, Steve, I can't let my precious daughter live with someone like you. If you care about Katie and Maya's future, you need to finalize the divorce quickly. Faced with my father's stern words, Steve agreed, tears streaming down his face. I'll be seeking property division and compensation from you and that woman, so be prepared. This isn't over, I said coldly before leaving with my father. In the following days, I received a substantial amount of money from Steve and the woman for child support and living expenses. News of their affairs spread quickly through their company, severely damaging their reputations. Overwhelmed by the negative publicity, the woman resigned and soon found herself burdened with debt from her payments to me. Steve's prospects for promotion disappeared, and his reputation plummeted. He was increasingly shunned by everyone. Meanwhile, I transitioned from part-time to full-time work, dedicating myself even more to my job. My hard work was recognized, leading to an increase in my salary and a more fulfilling life. Maya's happiness became my top priority, and I am committed to supporting her so that we can enjoy each day together.
I was born and raised in the quaint town of Harrow, a place so small that everyone knows your name and no secret stays hidden for long. After high school, I left for college, and soon after graduating, I dove headfirst into the retail industry. My passion wasn't just in sales, it was specifically in lingerie. Fueled by this drive, I worked tirelessly, eventually becoming the owner of a chain of lingerie boutiques that ranged from cozy local shops to upscale destinations. Despite my professional success, something always felt missing. That's when Henry came into my life. It all started with a simple friend request. His profile picture showed a man in a sharp suit with an even sharper gaze. Intrigued, I accepted, and soon discovered he was a lawyer, a detail that perfectly matched his polished appearance. Our first exchange was unassuming, but his humor and wit quickly drew me in. Late-night conversations with him became my solace after long, grueling days. We talked about everything, from silly topics like cheesy pickup lines to deeper, meaningful reflections. His messages brightened my evenings, and eventually, he suggested we meet in person. Our first meeting was at my favorite local cafe, renowned for its rich coffee. Henry was even more impressive in person. His charm and attentiveness far exceeded his online persona. We talked for hours, and by the time we parted ways, I couldn't deny the connection we shared. Over the next year, we grew closer, our relationship blossoming into something extraordinary. One chilly evening, as I was locking up one of my stores, Henry surprised me. His breath hung visibly in the cold air as he nervously held out a small, elegant box. With an earnest gaze, he began to speak. "Isa," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "we've been thriving together, just you and me. Recently, I realized it's time we made this official. I want you by my side forever. Will you marry me?" My heart raced, overwhelmed with emotion. Marriage was a big step, but as I looked into his sincere eyes, everything seemed to align. "Yes," I whispered, my voice shaky but filled with joy. "Yes, I'll marry you." But just as I began to revel in the moment, Henry's tone shifted. "There's something else we need to discuss," he said hesitantly. The word prenup fell like a cold shower over the warmth of the proposal. I blinked, taken aback. "Really, Henry? Is that necessary?" He quickly took my hands, his touch steadying me. "Isa, it's not about trust, it's about practicality. I've seen too many messy situations in my career. This is just protection, for both of us." He pulled out some documents. "It's straightforward. If either of us strays, the cheater forfeits their assets to the other. It's fair." I stared at the papers, conflicted. The romantic proposal now felt intertwined with a stark reality, but as I looked back at Henry, his expression was earnest. "All right," I finally said, "I'll consider it. But just so we're clear, Henry, I don't plan on ever giving you a reason to use this against me. That's all I'm asking," he said, visibly relieved. We celebrated that evening at a cozy restaurant, the warmth of the night momentarily making me forget the complexities of our conversation. Under the stars later, Henry pulled me close. "You know I love you, right? No document can change that." "I know," I replied, resting my head against his chest. "Just promise it won't come between us." "I promise," he said softly. A few days later, after consulting my own lawyer, I signed the prenup. It felt odd to sign something focused on the potential end of a relationship that had barely begun, but love is a gamble, and I was all in. For a while, we were the couple everyone admired, sharing laughs and stolen moments at gatherings, but as the months passed, subtle cracks began to form. The warmth we once shared started to cool. One day, during a shopping trip, we visited a perfume store where I chatted casually with a sales associate about different fragrances. After we left the store, Henry's demeanor shifted. His jaw was tight as he turned to me. "Who was that?" he asked sharply. Confused, I replied, "The sales associate? I was just asking about the perfumes." "Why?" His eyes were intense. "You seemed really into him," he accused. I stopped in my tracks, stunned by his insinuation. "Are you serious right now?" I was discussing perfumes. "Henry, what's gotten into you?" I asked, baffled by his outburst. He scoffed, shaking his head. "Forget it. Let's just go home," he muttered, brushing the moment aside. But that incident was just the beginning of something deeper. Over the following weeks, Henry's jealousy became more pronounced. He grew colder, sulking or throwing sarcastic remarks anytime I so much as interacted with another man. At home, he became distant, often engrossed in his laptop or phone while I ate dinner alone, the silence between us heavier than the air. Unable to bear the growing tension, I confronted him one evening in his study. "Henry, we need to talk," I said, firmly closing his laptop to ensure he paid attention. He sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "Isa, you don't understand the pressure I'm under at work. And when I see you laughing and chatting with other men, it gets to me. It feels like you don't respect our relationship enough to keep your distance," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. The conversation quickly escalated, both of us airing out unspoken frustrations and resentments. The wounds of our relationship bled raw, yet no solutions were found. The situation worsened when friends approached me with unsettling news. Henry had been spreading rumors, accusing me of flirting with other men. "Henry," I confronted him angrily one night, "you've been talking about me behind my back? Telling people I flirt with other guys? How could you?" "It's not like that," he stammered, trying to justify his actions. "I might have said something, but only because I see how they look at you. You're too friendly, Isa, and it. You have no right," I interrupted, furious. "You're supposed to support me, not tear me down with lies. How can you expect trust when you act like this?" The argument left both of us exhausted, the love we once shared now buried beneath layers of mistrust and bitterness. A few days later, I found a note on the kitchen counter. Henry's usually precise handwriting was rushed. "Isa, let's try to start over. Meet me at the Grand View Hotel, room 181, at 7:10 p.m. tonight. Let's put the past behind us and move forward. H." The gesture caught me off guard. Was this an olive branch? A chance to rebuild what we had lost? Despite my apprehension, hope stirred within me, fragile yet persistent. That entire day, my thoughts were consumed by the note and the possibility of a new beginning. By evening, hope fluttered in my chest like a delicate bird taking flight. But when I arrived at the hotel, Henry's demeanor shattered any expectations I had. He stood there, his face a mask of anger. "So the prodigal wife finally returns," he sneered, his voice thick with disdain. "Henry, something terrible happened tonight," I began, my voice trembling with urgency. "We need to talk." "Don't bother," he cut me off with a dramatic gesture, slamming a set of photographs onto the table. "Then explain these," he demanded furiously. Trembling, I picked up the photos. My blood ran cold. They showed me in a hotel room, entangled in a compromising position with a man I didn't recognize. My heart sank. "Henry, I swear," I stammered, horrified. "I don't know this man. I've never seen him before. Something bizarre happened tonight. I can't explain it." But Henry's fury was relentless, his trust in me crumbling before my eyes. I stammered, panic rising in my chest. Henry's scornful laugh sent a chill down my spine. "A monstrous mistake or just your monstrous actions? Marrying you was the real error," he declared coldly. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I steeled myself, determined to remain composed. "I didn't do this. Henry, you have to believe me," I pleaded desperately. He sneered, his tone venomous. "Believe you? Why should I? You're nothing but a liar and a cheater, and I'll make sure you don't get a dime from me. I'm taking this to court. I'll take everything." Grabbing his pre-packed suitcase, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the now empty house, leaving me devastated. I collapsed onto the sofa, my body racked with sobs. A sharp, throbbing pain consumed my head, clouding my thoughts. It wasn't just a headache, it was as if a dense fog had descended over my brain, making the events of the night disjointed and surreal. Then, it struck me, the wine. I had only had one glass, but the overwhelming dizziness and blackout were inexplicable. The symptoms were far too severe for such a small amount. Desperate for answers, I called my friend Riley, a nurse. "Riley, something's wrong," I blurted out, my voice shaky. I had one glass of wine, and everything went dark. I woke up hours later, and now Henry has these photos. None of it makes sense. Riley's tone was immediately serious. "Isa, it sounds like you might have been drugged. You need to go to a hospital or a lab and get tested immediately. Tell them everything, especially about the wine and your symptoms." Without hesitation, I drove to the lab, my mind racing to piece together fragments of the evening. I explained my ordeal to the technician, who solemnly drew several vials of blood for testing. Days later, a heavy letter from Henry landed on my doorstep. My hand shook as I opened it. The cold, formal language confirmed my worst fears. Henry was suing me for infidelity, aiming to strip me of everything based on our prenuptial agreement. The trial was set for a month away. Panicked, I called my lawyer, Jacob. His voice was a small comfort amid the turmoil. "Isa, come to my office. We need to strategize." When I arrived at his office, I spotted Henry outside, walking with a young man. My heart froze. The man looked eerily familiar. Then it hit me, he was the same individual from the incriminating photographs. Instinctively, I reached for my phone and began recording. I captured Henry and the young man exchanging an envelope, which the man quickly concealed. Adrenaline surged through me as I realized the potential importance of what I had just witnessed. In Jacob's office, I shared the video. His eyebrows shot up as he watched the secretive exchange. "This is significant, Isa. It looks highly suspicious. We need to involve an investigator," he said, dialing his contact immediately. Jacob's friend Wyatt, a seasoned investigator, agreed to take the case. He wasted no time trailing the young man and digging into his background. Within days, Wyatt summoned us to his office. His expression was grave. I spoke to the young man. Wyatt began. "He's an actor, down on his luck. He admitted your husband hired him to pose in those photos. Henry orchestrated the entire setup, including drugging you." As he spoke, an email notification buzzed on my phone. My blood test results had arrived. With trembling hands, I opened the attachment. My heart skipped a beat as I read the results, positive for a potent sedative. The pieces of the puzzle finally came together. Henry's betrayal ran deeper than I could have ever imagined, but now, I had the truth on my side. The courtroom was tense as I handed my phone to Jacob. He scanned the blood test results, his expression hardening with determination. "Isa," he said firmly, "this is the evidence we need. Not only can we defend you, but we can also confront Henry effectively. We'll keep everything confidential until the court date. Let's catch him off guard." A week passed, and I tried to distract myself by focusing on my lingerie store. One afternoon, Henry walked in, smugly introducing me to Nova, his new fiancée. He flaunted their engagement, but his smile was hollow. Nova, much younger and seemingly unaware of Henry's true nature, observed me with curiosity and skepticism. Henry's arrogance was palpable as he declared, "Soon, this store will be mine." I resisted the urge to respond, remembering Jacob's advice to stay silent until court. Instead, I gave a measured smile. "We'll see what the judge decides, Henry." The court date came quickly, and the atmosphere was electric with tension. Henry, representing himself, stood confidently to make his opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth and commanding, "today, you will see the true character of the woman before you. Isa has not only violated her marriage vows but has undermined the sanctity of our household with her deceitful actions." He displayed photos of a supposed affair on a screen, stirring murmurs in the courtroom. Henry painted himself as a wronged husband, his words dripping with indignation and scorn. Each sentence was delivered with dramatic precision, aimed at swaying the judge. When his tirade ended, Jacob rose. His calm demeanor was a sharp contrast to Henry's theatrics. With measured authority, he began to dismantle the false narrative. "Your Honor," Jacob stated, "the claims against my client are not only baseless, but part of a calculated scheme by Mr. Clark." Jacob gestured toward the back of the courtroom, and the actor Henry had hired entered. The room buzzed with shock as the young man nervously recounted his involvement, admitting he was paid to stage a scene for Henry's fabricated evidence. His trembling voice added weight to the revelation. Next, Jacob presented my blood test results. The courtroom fell silent as he explained how I had been unknowingly drugged. The judge's expression darkened as Jacob meticulously connected the dots. unveiling Henry's pattern of manipulation in previous marriages to financially exploit his ex-wives. As Jacob concluded, he requested not only the dismissal of Henry's fraudulent claims, but also fair compensation for the ordeal I had endured. The judge deliberated before delivering her verdict. She ruled in my favor, voiding the prenuptial agreement and awarding me $60,010 in damages. Relief and vindication washed over me as tears welled in my eyes. Henry's face turned ashen. Nova, who had been silently observing, rushed out of the courtroom. She returned moments later to thank me for exposing the truth, then promptly left Henry for good. The trial's sensational details quickly made headlines. Henry's professional reputation was destroyed, and he lost his license to practice law. Encouraged by the revelations, his ex-wives filed lawsuits, exposing his long history of deceit. Financially and socially ruined, Henry was left with nothing. That evening, as I locked up my store and watched the sunset cast long shadows, I reflected on the journey. It had been a fight fraught with despair, but it was also a testament to resilience and the pursuit of justice. I had faced the storm and emerged stronger, with the truth as my shield.